Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation and respect, the InkGuild acknowledges that we live, work, and play on traditional Treaty 7 territory, the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. This territory is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Finally, we acknowledge all Indigenous and non-Indigenous to honor and celebrate this territory alongside us. I read a whole bunch of comics, and part of the reason why I love them is that you have this expansive universe where everyone is almost interacting. And I'm not going to say that every once in a while I'm just like, kick Gotham out of the DCEU. Just kick it out. No one needs, like, Batman. He's a regular dude in tights. He's a furry that goes out at night and beats people up. Like, you're telling me he's competing with the flying Jesus metaphor? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey there.
Bonjour. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild podcast. Just go to fucking therapy.
Don't correct me. I don't care.
Need to start a revolution.
I'm going to fucking explode if I don't say this by now.
She would challenge them to a double dutch.
I'm going to summon up his spirit to fix all of this up for me.
You didn't have good enough tea and or comic books, so...
And you know what? I'm gonna say it.
All of them are fucking idiots.
Simply everyone is taking cocaine.
Just say your morning routine.
You're replicant breathing.
I'm so excited to find out if Jughead got abducted by aliens or not.
Boneless.
Is your refrigerator running? Better go get it then.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lee, and welcome back to InkGuild podcast. Dean is actually here for this session, but I have taken his seat of power for today, and you'll have to deal with me running it, as well as Marie-Soleil is here.
Hello.
Gabe is here.
Hello.
And then Dean is here, even though I've taken his seat of power.
Hello.
Today we are going to be talking about comics and the genre/medium that they are in all their weird and wonderful glory. So, I'm just going to start us right off into it with our first question, and it is, when did you first get into comics? Marie-Soleil, when did you first get into comics?
So the first comics I read were like Archie comics, and that's because my mom took away all of my other books, so I would clean my room, and I found those under my bed, and I was about like 13.
Nice.
Yeah. Instead of procrastinating on cleaning my room, I read a bunch of Archie's comics that I found under my bed. But I didn't really... I'm sorry?
Nope, you go first, sorry.
I didn't really get into comics much until I was older and found Deadpool over TikTok. Not TikTok, Tumblr. And got into it through that.
That's awesome. So, like, So you found Deadpool through Tumblr. Was that, like, your first OG favorite character that got you into it? Sorry, Tumblr.
I would say, yeah, that Deadpool got me into comics. Yeah.
Nice.
He's an interesting character.
I love Deadpool. He is probably one of my favorites, so I can totally understand that. How about you, Gabe? How did you get into comics?
I first got into comics sort of like, well, I started with it was originally like I when I was a kid, I saw it was like a combo of the Spider-Man movies and then the X-Men movies, and then it was the cartoon X-Men Evolution that like that got me into my childhood X-Men phase, and I just read X-Men comics like a lunatic.
Nice.
And then later on, when I watched Teen Titans, I got super into Teen Titans. And then when I was in high school, I started getting more into I guess more like like I started getting into like Sandman and like Moon Knight and stuff.
That's awesome. I remember, is it like the X-Men show when they were all kind of like going in high school or whatever? Because I remember that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was like the X-Men show where like they went to like a non-Xavier high school. It was weird.
I love comic book adaptations. Was there any character that you particularly started reading besides just X-Men? Was there like one X-Men that you like zeroed in?
Oh, when I was a kid,
Yeah.
Gambit. Yeah.
Gambit
Gambit was my boy, absolutely.
Heresy. Nightcrawler is the ultimate.
Nightcrawler was pretty. I was a big fan of Nightcrawler too, especially after X-Men 2. But Gambit was my gold star. He was my gold standard. When I was a kid, I was like, this can't get better than this.
I will accept that. I still think Nightcrawler is the best. But how about you, Dean?
Spider-Man blanket. So, my first ever exposure really to comics in general, like the world of comics, was a Spider-Man blanket. It was one of Spider-Man web slinging through the city, and at the time, Spider-Man was my first real superhero, my first comic superhero. Later on, I strangely became a DC person afterwards, like watching Teen Titans, watching Teen Titans, a lot of Justice League animation, and I think a few references to the comics through through conversations and stuff with friends, but ultimately I never really picked up comics, like physical comics, until high school, I think, and those were like a bit of Marvel, a bit of DC, Image Comics, and nowadays that kind of helped expose me to some comics that I'll be talking about later in the episode. But yeah, all started with the Spider-Man blanket.
That's awesome. When you first started picking up comics to read, was there a particular character that you zeroed in on to get you into it?
For me?
Yeah.
I think it had to be two. It was either the Flash or Spider-Man.
Nice.
Yeah, so Flash is, I think, maybe one of my favorite DC superheroes, because the persona of the Flash is very much like the persona of Spider-Man. Obviously not in power, but just in anyone can be these characters, or anyone can be the Flash, or anyone can be Spider-Man. There are different iterations of, there's the Flash family, there's the Spider-Man family, and I'm not familiar with specific lines or with specific comic runs, but just knowing of the different personas that have taken up the mantle of Spider-Man or the Flash, and how each of them vary differently. I never really picked up the physical medium, but through YouTube videos and conversations, it helped me learn a lot more about Wally West, Miles Morales, Barry Allen, Peter Parker, Gwen Stacy, a whole bunch of differing people between the two, or between the two different mantles respectively.
Yeah, I find that how branching these characters can be to be one of the main appeals, especially for me, for comics, especially with the Flash or Spider-Man, who have gone through multiple versions of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I suppose now it's my turn. I first started reading comics when I picked up a really, really old Conan the Barbarian comic, which quickly got taken away and put away back on the shelf to keep it safe. But what really got me reading them was the Justice League cartoons, Justice League Unlimited, because Batman was great in that, and then I just never recovered from that obsession. and here I am today.
Yeah, Batman is a. I'm not super familiar with like Batman in the comics, but you know, Batman as a cultural icon was everywhere. So
Yeah, he's huge and everywhere, and I will say, some Batman Batman is either really really good or really really bad in the comics. So like you kind of have to take your pick. Other than that, like Marie-Soleil, I really got into comics later on with Deadpool because he's just hilarious. And once you start reading one superhero, they kind of just make reference to other ones, so you have to pick that one up to read, and yeah, the vicious cycle continues. So, now that we've all established what our favorite characters are or what our favorite runs are, what do you guys think makes a good comic? Marie-Soleil.
I have to say, it's the characters in the story for me, because like the art can change between different issues and different runs, but if the characters fall flat, then I'm not going to be able to keep I'm not going to enjoy reading it, because if I don't like the characters and the story doesn't go anywhere, just like any book or anything type of media I try to consume, I'm not going to be able to stick with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially with how character driven these franchises are, because like Batman will die 100,000 times if DC can keep on milking it for money, but like what makes it worth reading when you know that the character's going to come out at the end? So yeah, the characters in comics are really interesting, I find, because like every version of Deadpool has to fit the character model, even though it's written by like 17 different people throughout the ages, but you can still recognize Deadpool from the 80s to Deadpool in modern times.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any like particular sterling example that you can think of for like comic book characterization that you really like, or you just know it's important to you?
So I've read the DC Bombshells comics.
Yes.
And there's something I really like in there is so the premise of the DC Bombshell comic book run is that it takes place in World War II. And we're not following male superheroes. We follow the female superheroes. So the first superhero you meet is actually Batwoman. And she's saving the Wayne family from the mugger. Like, it's obvious that it's them. It's the married couple, the little kid. They're leaving the premiere of Zorro. And later on, and you have somebody reading an article about how Batwoman saved the Waynes. But
That's awesome.
Yeah, and they took these characters and they put them in a different time period, but they didn't change the entire characterization of them. Like they made Poison Ivy a woman in France who's smuggling. She's a smuggler in France, and they changed her backstory to the fact that she mutated herself by creating a perfume to kill German soldiers in occupied France.
That's a really cool take on her backstory. I have never read that run, but that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. And she still turns green and she can control plants and everything. And she still ends up dating Harley Quinn, but it's...
As she should.
Yeah. And they're the same character with a different backstory to them. The Joker, like, it touches on Harley Quinn's backstory with the Joker, but when we first meet her, she's actually reformed back as Harleen Quinzel, a psychiatrist, and stuff happens that I don't want to spoil to have her revert back to Harley Quinn and then she meets Poison Ivy, and it's really good. It's a really good run.
Amazing. I have to say, DC particularly, I notice, does a really good job taking its core characters and putting them in alternate universes or alternate like genres while keeping the core of that character the same.
Oh, I agree 100%. That's what makes DC such a fun. Like it what makes DC stories just so interesting because they have multiple variations of not even the same persona, but the same person. Like there are different versions of Harley Quinn. There are different versions of like Bruce Wayne. There are different versions of of Clark Kent. Like there are so many different interpretations for these characters, but somehow they manage to stick to the same characteristics that makes these characters iconic, and that's so cool.
Yeah.
I really like that branching as well, and I'll definitely have to check out Bombshells. I tried earlier this week, but I was too distracted, so I'll probably try and pick it up again.
They throw a lot of characters at you all at once, so it can be a little hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I do have one question. For Batwoman in this one, is she Cassandra Cain? Or
she's Kate Kane.
Kate Kane.
Yes.
Okay. Makes sense.
And they actually touch on her Jewish. I'm sorry?
I'm assuming I got the name wrong when I was thinking of it, but Kate Kane? And they touch on her what?
They actually, because Kate Kane and Bruce Wayne, to an extent, because they're cousins, they're Jewish from his mother's side of the family. And because this comic book run is taking place during World War II, that's a prominent feature in this. And while I am not Jewish, and I cannot speak for Jewish people, from what I've read online, from the reviews of this I've read online, because I did check them, I didn't want to go telling a bunch of people, you should read these, if it was like really bad representation or problematic representation. A lot of the stuff I've seen online says they have good representation of the Jewish characters.
That's awesome.
That's really
I'll definitely
good to hear.
have to check that out then. I also find it interesting that it's World War II that it's set in, because historically that was the largest demographic that was reading comics was during World War II. And also, fun factlet, 30% of like reading material that was sent to military bases in Europe were comic books at that time period. So fun little factlet.
Cool.
But before I get distracted again by what sounds to be an amazing comic that I'll definitely have to look up, Gabe, what do you think makes a good comic?
I mean, I pretty much feel the same as Marie-Soleil. I think characters and story are the major part of it. I do think art style is a really big thing for me. I mean, for me personally, like I forgot to mention it on the first question, but like another comic that I read as a kid was this comic. It was not a superhero comic, so I didn't know if I could talk about it yet. But it was this superhero. It was not. It was this comic book series called Bone by Joe Smith.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember and that series has amazing characters and writing. I remember what jumped out at me as a kid was I really like the art style, and I think what's sort of struck me about a lot of the comics that I've come to love is usually it's if a run is done by if it's usually one artist or most of the thing where it maintains the same art style throughout most of the run, then I think art is usually it's a big thing for me. I love the way the characters are designed. I love paneling and stuff like that. I think all that is really cool and really makes these comics sort of jump out at you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of because I think a major example that of a recent comic book that I've been reading is the currently ongoing Moon Knight run by Jed MacKay, which I've talked about plenty of times on our Discord server, but I'd say I've read a couple of other Moon Knight runs. This is probably my favorite out of them. It has amazing character writing, and I think like the story is really cool. But what really jumps out at me every time that a new issue comes out is how like just like immaculate and gorgeous the art is every single issue. It like I have made every single time an issue comes out, I'm like, okay, which one's gonna be my wallpaper for the next couple months, you know?
Yeah.
Nice.
Now, I definitely want to like just clarify. You can talk about whatever comics you want anywhere on this. I
Okay.
just put aside a different section for like non-superhero comics because I know that when I focus on comics, I always think of superheroes, but there's a lot more to the medium than just superheroes.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
I like how you brought up different styles too, in your examination of what makes a great comic book, because like I find that if I pick up a comic book and I don't like the art, I can just put it back because I know I probably won't like the comic just based on that alone. But I'm also persnickety.
I mean, I do think like there are probably some really great stories that I'm missing out on because like the art is like because and I mean that has happened before where like because I remember God, I can't remember the artist's name, but the guy who did the bottom that Moon Knight run, like
Yep.
I hate the art style in that run, but I read it because it was a Moon Knight story, and I ended up liking it because I think it's a decent story. I really hate the art style though, and
Yeah.
I basically only got through it because I love the character, and I feel like this has probably happened with a bunch of other comic books where I just saw it and I was just like, nope, I do not like that art style, and probably missed out on something great. But I think, I mean, with comics, it's difficult to say like don't judge a book by its cover because I think like it's very much like a visual medium. Like if the art fails, and that's like half the whole thing right there.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting too because like especially with modern comics, because like in the silver or gold or bronze age, you used to have a lot of explanation text and like narrative text in the panels. And recently that has started fading out of the genre. So a lot more of the atmosphere and storytelling is based on panel design and how you draw it now too, right? Because like when they didn't have the technology to actually make backgrounds and it was just like blank color, they had to rely on huge text blocks. But now that we have like beautifully printed comics with full backgrounds, there's so much more you can tell with the art than just with your words. So no, I think the art's pretty important. But you're right about character and story. Who wants to read about a superhero just waking up and going to bed every day? There needs to be something for them to do.
It needs to, and like I think it has to like build to something good too. Because it has to like. So I feel like there's a lot of comic runs that I've read where I was like, I really like this, but like if this was not an interesting story at the very least, I would not be into it.
Yeah, that's fair. And can I say on that note, there's nothing worse than a comic book run that builds up to something really cool and then they retcon it so it never happened.
Oh my god!
I know it happens a lot, but like every once in a while something like that happens and I'm like, oh okay. We're gonna put this character down for a little bit while I just be mad. We'll come back to you later.
I'm gonna put this character down. We're gonna kill them for a few issues.
Yeah. If only in my heart, they are gone for now.
Dead to me.
Every once in a while. So, Dean, what do you think makes a good comic book?
Well, this is interesting because to be honest, I'm not super familiar with like superhero comics as you guys are, but what makes comics so cool now, especially nowadays, is that it doesn't ever have to just be superheroes. Like some of my favorite comics are not related to Marvel, DC, or Image. Like they are entirely their own special special thing. I definitely do agree that writing is an important part of what makes comics good, and I'll vouch for that being already said. But for me, I think it has to be like nowadays the creativity that it has and the opportunities that it brings for like not just like fans of Marvel and DC, but just like storytellers and creatives in general. Like one of my favorite comic books that I don't think is associated with either of them is I think it's, so I have two. It's the, oh, okay, so this one, so the first one that I'll talk about really quick is associated with DC characters, but I don't think it's by an official DC writer, and it's the Teen Titans by Gabriel Piccolo, I think. You guys have ever seen? If you guys have ever seen those before,
Yes.
So yeah,
They're beautiful.
yeah. So I don't know if there are like official comics of that yet, but just it is such a cool interpretation of how the Teen Titans are presented. Like they look like actual teenagers. Like they're the kind of teenagers that like go to a movie late at night. They're the kind of teenagers that you know, either don't go to school, have fun in between classes. Like it adds just a whole new interpretation to established characters, and it's what makes me think. It's what makes me like love how creative some people are now, like especially nowadays, not just with like established characters, but with completely original, well, not completely original, but just like with different stories. Like another one of my favorite comics is Icarus and the Sun. For anyone who may have heard of that, it's an interpretation of the myth from Greek mythology, but it is presented in this very like visually interesting art style that physically embodies the sun, and it's a tragic love story, and it's wonderful. I know that there was a comic like a limited comic release of it, and God, I wanted it so bad, but just as someone who isn't as familiar with like comic runs, like the physical comic books, compared to you guys and compared to some other people that I know, it is wonderful that comics are just so wide and vast as a multi-medium that anyone can get into it.
Yeah. I find it really interesting too, especially on that point, because when you say comic books, lots of people assume comic books is a genre in and of itself,
Right.
when it's really just a medium for essentially everything. Because I'm bad at this too, because when I say comic books, 90% of the time I'm talking about the superhero genre and trade paperbacks, but there's so much more than that. Right? So like you have comic books like Mouse out there, and then you have comic books like Superman and Red and Blue, which are like two completely different things, but everyone lumps them together because a comic book is a comic book. I'm definitely gonna have to look up Icarus and the Sun though.
It's
'Cause that sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's just it's the legend of, of Icarus flying too close to the sun, but visualized as but with the sun personified. So it comes off as this like tragic thing. It comes off as this tragic love story. And Lee, I know how you feel about like romance, but trust me, it is very, very, very good.
I'll definitely check it out. It sounds really cool. So for Icarus and the Sun, what did you like the most? Was it the art? Because you mentioned that the art style is really out there. Or was it more the writing?
Definitely the art. And I want to, if it's all right, like, can we talk about like art style for a while? Because like there are some gorgeous,
let's do it.
There are some gorgeous like comics that I know of that are just beautiful to look at. Like I don't know shit all about the story, but I like Icarus and the Sun, the Teen Titans, the Teen Titans by Gabriel Piccolo. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Stefan Sejic, I think. I don't know.
I'm
like hold on, let me see if I can try to find
not. Is anyone else? Pictures?
Yeah, I'll here, let me So but yeah, Stefan Sejic, fan art obviously, and I think just the one that I definitely really do want to talk about are the Monstrous comics. If anyone is familiar with those, they are hella cool to look at. It's very like it's a clash of like steampunk and like art decor and a whole array of like beautiful colors, and it's just so great to look at. I have 4 issues of them. Or I have 3 collections of the main comics, and I don't know shit all about the story, but it's gorgeous to look at. It is so pretty.
Yeah. There's a point where like some comics you kind of just want to put on your wall, because I don't know if you've read it, Gabe, but the 2016 run of Moon Knight has some beautiful like pages that if I could, would enlarge and put on my wall, because
the
some
Ellis
are
run?
just gorgeous. I actually literally do not know the author or artist for this one. I'm just like the 2016 here. I spammed people with these comic book panels beforehand, so I'll just copy and paste one. But in some cases, like comics very much, due to their visual medium, just become like a gorgeous piece of art. Here, let's find it.
Okay, I'm posting the reference for Stepan. I don't know. This artist. Yeah. Like it's very thing. It's very like I like the different interpretations of the characters. I mean, when you first see it, it's like very nice.
So, alright.
Also, I want to say I have not read the 2016 run. It's been one of the ones I've been meaning to.
Honestly, I would really recommend it. The first,
I gotta do
I'm just gonna go on a little nerd rant here. It's beautiful. But the first 6 issues are short stories unto themselves. Because you read it, it's one and done, which is really refreshing, especially in comics, because so many of them are like, but check it next week for more, right? And the art is just beautiful. After that, they had to change writers, but it doesn't suffer from it. It's a really beautiful story. Sorry, I had to get a different device for this picture.
I think in terms of other comics, there's a artist that I follow, Art by Teslin, I think. So their name is Teslin. It's really, really gorgeous artwork, and they're starting to do comics now. I haven't read most of them, but it's very steampunk inspired, and it's gorgeous. I need to find other words to say other than just gorgeous, but really, it's so pretty.
Sometimes pretty and gorgeous are the words that work. So, if we're talking about art, I want to give a beautiful example, because I have been reading too many comics in the past week, and I decided to do a quick little thing, and that was read a random comic from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way up to present, and there are some beautiful gems of how they used to draw comics. So the first one, and I'm sending you a picture of it right now, this is an issue of Moon Knight from the 80s. And if you notice, there's no background.
Oh,
and it's amazing. The art is terrible. It gets even better. This is another one of an earlier issue. I forget the exact year of it, but just look at this art. It is next level.
Wow.
And then you take that and you compare it to the more modern runs that have art like this. And I think that sometimes I forget how important art to me is in comics, because like the first two pictures that I show for the people who aren't here with the visual medium, they're very primary color based with really bold colors and almost no shading. This was actually a result of the printing technology that they had in their time, because they couldn't really do anything too sophisticated. Around 91, when they started doing computerized coloring, is when we could start getting a lot more sophisticated colors. But like, it's crazy the shift in style and art. Sorry, style and art. Wow, style of art and how they're using it to tell the stories. Because like the second picture, it looks like Kermit and a Cloaker got together, and that's the dude in the background with no face, weird hands, and just like green, right?
Just a green boy.
So he's just green. There's no other defining features.
I love how in the first pic, Moon Knight's cape sort of flares up while he's standing.
It looks like a crescent moon.
It looks like he's farting.
A little bit.
It looks like...
Guys, I read so many bad comics in preparation from this. Like, some comics before the 70s, like, I'm just like, no way. No thank you. That's beautiful.
Unrelated, so I just posted artwork of Gabriel Piccolo's Teen Titans. I didn't realize that he was the same artist behind Icarus and the Sun. That's fantastic.
Nice.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but yeah, that one image of Icarus and the Sun pretty much like tells the entire story of that tragic love story, and it's such a cool interpretation. It's a very beautiful interpretation of the story, really, because it's a tragic story when you first hear about it, but artistic interpretation carries over in comics, and that's so cool to see, because it's not just one image either. You have whole storylines and whole years to play with. It's so cool. That being said, though, with art, like, because we're talking about art style, you can capture so much emotion in single panels of a comic.
Yeah. And I really have to give comics their due for art, because like some of the art you can see in comics is so much more impactful than it would be otherwise, I find, because of the story attached, right? I'm gonna segue a little bit and say, just to answer my question, art is the most important thing I look for in a comic, if I'm honest, because I find if I don't like the art style, I just put it down. And like Gabe said, that has led to me missing out on some really awesome stories before, because like the whole Daredevil Reborn run, I could not read for the longest time, because it's a really cool story, and I recently read it, and it is really, really cool, but like the first time I went to pick it up, it was like, see you later. And the thing is, like, it's not bad art, it just, some of it just does not vibe.
No.
Yeah, I agree. Just, me still kind of talking about Gabriel Piccolo, just, it's being able to experiment with different art styles that makes it so interesting as a medium. Like, the contrast between like the Archie comics and DC and and like Golden Age DC, and then like current Marvel versus like webtoons. There's and not even factoring anime in yet, or like manga in yet, just there is so much that, like, for me, I still consider like any kind of storytelling, this, like, the writing has to be the most important, but visually comics just have so much to offer in terms of not just a good story, but a good way of presenting it. And it's always a fun way of seeing just how like how creative people can be when it comes to telling that story. Like you can, like if you were to base, like I've seen some of the, what is it? What was the run with DC in like Soviet Russia? The Red Sun?
The Red Sun?
The Red Sun. I love that. That is so cool. Like seeing everyone in, like, I think when DC kind of does like, I don't want to say period pieces, but when they take their characters and put them in a specific time period, that's so cool. Like, it's still the same character, but like ultimately it's just a completely different aesthetic, and it works. It works for what they're going with.
DC's A game has always been their ability to almost write fan fiction of their own comic, if you know what I mean. They're not married to Gotham being 1940s meets the 90s with gangsters. And I think that's really cool because it's not something that can really happen too much with Marvel Comics, because Marvel Comics are set in the real world. So if you're drawing New York, you're drawing New York. You can't make New York some like messed up like you can't make New York steampunk necessarily like you could with Gotham and Gaslight.
Oh yeah,
right?
that one.
But because Gotham by Gaslight, beautiful comic run. I haven't watched the movie. Apparently, it's very good as well. But something on that vein that I want to talk about while we're talking about art, but we do probably have to move a little bit after this because
before we move off of art, I do want to talk about something on art before we move off of that. So after you're done,
okay. So something I really love when comics do with art is when they give a visual cue of something is different or something is wrong. Because I just posted a picture of one of the Moon Knight runs, and you note if you look at the panels, they are floating and they have ragged edges. And that's a visual cue that something else is happening in the comic. I'm not going to give you spoilers for this one because I think this is a really cool storyline. But the visual cues about what's happening and how they shifted from the main colors in Moon Knight being white, black, and blue in this run to a bright red and yellow, I thought was a really neat shift. And when they add little cues like that in the art, it makes me like froth at the mouth with enthusiasm. Another thing that I find really, really cool is in Batman. So there is a couple issues recently of Superman Red and Blue and Batman Black and White and Wonder Woman Gold and Black. And what I really love about these runs is when they introduce another superhero that has these when they introduce like Wonder Woman to the Batman story or Batman to the Superman story, they change the palette. Because the whole idea of these comics is in Superman Red and Blue, everything is red or blue. That's the two colors they're allowed. But the moment they brought Batman in, it very sharply went all blue as all the red faded away and then was just black and white because now Batman's here and it almost affects the areas they're in. So I love it when comics do that. Sorry for that little rant. But Marie-Soleil, you had something else to add.
I was going to talk about something sort of negative about like comic superheroes, in particular comic book art.
Yes.
Is that there is a trend with drawing really similar poses for different characters in different scenarios. At least in older comic book artists' artwork, you see a lot of women, when doesn't matter what they're doing, they could be fighting crime, they could be standing around, it looks like they should have high heels on. Just the pose that their feet are in, they should be wearing high heels even when they're not. Or they're in these weird contortions where they're showing off their butt and their boobs at the same time. It got to the point where like there's the Hawkeye initiative. If anybody's heard of that, it's where people will draw Hawkeye in these poses to show off how ridiculous they are. And it sometimes will have other characters in it, other male superheroes. I've seen the Hulk in a couple, which is so It's so nice to see. It's very amusing, but that just goes to show how ridiculous these poses are.
Wasn't there
Yeah.
that one like infamous pose from Spider-Woman, I think?
Oh, yeah.
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 Oh, that one.
With the Spider-Woman.
Yeah.
That one's so stupid.
The Spider-Woman pose.
The
Where you can
Spider-Woman
see her
pose, yeah.
butthole through the
They
leotard.
colored her skin to match her uniform is the best way to describe it. Like,
Yeah.
she might as well be naked.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure the artist that illustrated those was also like got into the industry from drawing like straight up racy pictures of women too.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
there's that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just posted 2 examples of exactly what Marie-Soleil said because they were on my iPad because I got so mad about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, you're completely right. Some of the ways that they draw people in comics is like you just gotta laugh at some point.
Yeah.
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 And it just happens over and over again. You see the same things. And I will admit I haven't been seeing it a lot in more modern comics, but in the older ones, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
like we had been talking a lot about the male gaze versus the female gaze. And there's been discourse around that in other podcasts, but basically just that was back when not necessarily like maybe it was an exclusively male thing for a long time, or it's at least been kind of like considered that way. But the only ever times that I ever knew, or the only other like groups of people that I knew that were reading comics were men. So
Mhm.
now that comics like thankfully have been more like attentive of like basic fucking anatomy for one, and just like being more like respectful of like, you know, this is too much, let's not do this. Like it's just been more natural to read these stories because it's just too much to it's just too much for like a very interesting character no less to just be put like to be posed all seductively, especially if it's a very interesting story nonetheless either. Like you see that obviously.
Yeah.
No. You're right. And I have to say, so like I was talking to my parents about this before I started because they're all elder nerds and my grandmother was over. And so on this point that you brought up, Marie-Soleil, we started talking about Wonder Woman and how she was originally like drawn to get girls into comics and how that affected how they made her character. And my grandmother went on this rant about how I don't even know what issue it is, but apparently like way back when they reset Wonder Woman. So like in the Silver Age they reset Wonder Woman so she didn't have any powers anymore and had to learn kung fu. And apparently, I haven't read these. It's coming from my grandmother. It was terrible art. She was over sexualized. She became a bimbo, and then they put her in charge of a man. And so, like, it's interesting to see the shift in how comic books portray people, especially women, in light of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I realized that anecdote was like very far wandering, but my main point is the evolution of how they portray certain people is crazy. Because even if you read some of the older comics, if you were in a white dude too, that was where art got real rough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of off topic, but did anybody else watch the movie about the creator of Wonder Woman, Dr. What's his face, and his Wonder Woman or something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't think so.
So creepy.
So the guy that created Wonder Woman, he based her off of his wife and his girlfriend. Their girlfriend? They were a polyamorous triad.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were into the kink scene.
And like in the original comics, Wonder Woman would get tied up at least like once every 2 pages, if not more.
her main weakness. Like, the only way you could defeat Wonder Woman was for a man to tie her up.
What?
I am not joking. That is canon in the original comics.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it's
Oh
crazy.
my god!
Why do you think she has a whip?
That's
Or, well,
gross.
the lasso.
Oh my god.
Her original
Yeah.
costume design is based off of lingerie.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Just
Sorry, like, yeah.
what is it? I think another case of like women in comics being just essentially like written and drawn, marketed essentially to like a young male audience, if not just a male audience predominantly, is what there was the there was the case with Supergirl with just like the mini skirt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And then I think,
So, sorry, continue.
well, I was just gonna say, like, from what I know, like Supergirl and Power Girl, those were a little too much.
Yeah.
Boob windows.
Yeah.
No. It's really, like, yeah, some of it is hilarious. But
I mean,
we should probably move on. There's so
Yeah.
much we could talk
I
about
think
for
Gabe
this.
wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go Gabe.
I do feel I feel like the conversation has shifted ever so
little
slightly
bit.
from Daredevil.
A little bit.
I just
bit.
remember,
Let's go
I
back.
just remember we were talking about Daredevil and like art and stuff, and I just like I just remembered another thing that I forgot to say about the art is how like some comics convey movement and like that sort of thing, which I think it's really interesting. And you brought up Daredevil Reborn, and that made me think of not Daredevil Reborn, but my absolute favorite Daredevil run of all time, Here Comes Daredevil by Mark Waid, which has just some of the best like examples of I think coloring and like the way that movement is conveyed in Daredevil, especially like to suggest like his like that like that sight is not his deal is sort of like a I don't know. It does a really good job at conveying it, and it's a very gorgeous run. It just made me think of that. But
Yeah,
that's
no,
not.
that's beautiful run. But we did get distracted.
No, not distracted. I had thought of that like long before the conversation shifted into a different direction.
I apologize
It's
for
okay.
moving us into a feminist
Yeah,
direction.
it's alright. It's alright.
Don't apologize.
And Gabe's just bringing us back on track. It all works out. So, Marie-Soleil. We're going to do the same order. Favorite comic book character and or comic book art or arc or run?
Oh. One moment. That's a hard question. You've mentioned this question to me before, and I've been trying to think of it for a while. It's a hard question.
If you don't have a absolute number one, if you don't have like an absolute number one and instead have like a handful of favorite heroes, like that is also valid.
Yeah. Well, I'd say my favorite run, I think, would be the Bombshells. DC Bombshells. And I like the anti-heroes with like Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Catwoman, and then in Marvel you've got Deadpool and the Vigilantes. Give me Vigilantes over superheroes any day.
Yeah, I could see that.
Spider-Man and Daredevil.
So, question for you. You said Vigilantes over superheroes. What makes the difference for you?
So the way I see it is a superhero tends to be somebody larger than life. They are a superpowered individual that deals with like world-ending circumstances, and the majority of the time, everybody's on their side. The majority of the time, not all the time, but the majority of the time. If the Fantastic Four wreck part of New York by stopping Doctor Doom's Doom bots, they don't normally get the city mad at them because they stopped the Doom bots, even if they wrecked a couple buildings. But when Spider-Man shows up and like web slings a bunch of like bank robbers together or something, you've got the police department that's shooting at him.
Yeah.
And I just
that is a solid distinction.
Yeah. It's these smaller scale people that still try to do the good thing, even though almost everybody that has power is on the opposite side.
That's awesome. Okay. So Gabe, how about you?
I'm trying to think of like, because I definitely have like some characters who are my favorite characters. Like I think Moon Knight is definitely like, if I had to pick a number one, it would be Moon Knight, because Moon Knight has consistently been like, I think he's an interesting superhero, and like I think he's an interesting sort of way to do like an anti-hero type character. And I will say again, I think the current run of Moon Knight is just, I think it's doing some interesting things, especially like with his character, with like his whole deal with Khonshu. Like I think,
yeah,
I adore that character. I think he's very interesting. I love the fact that it's like it's like Marcel said, it's like a vigilante, and he's like down to earth, but he still sort of has like that larger than life quality, and he's like sort of like a paranormal vigilante almost.
Yeah,
it's very fun. It's very unique. I'm trying to think of some other superheroes that I really like before I get to like specific runs. I know. I mean, Daredevil is always going to be one of my favorites. To me, Daredevil is everything Batman fans think Batman is. No hate.
True.
I adore Devil. I adore Devil. This is. I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite characters of all time, but definitely a character that sticks out in my brain is like a recent addition to like the Marvel pantheon that I expected to like to hate when I first saw the title Gwenpool. I was like, oh, I'm going to fucking hate this. This is going to be the most annoying comic book that I'm ever going to read in my life. And then I read it and I was like, what the fuck? I genuinely love this. How did this happen? For those of you who haven't read Gwenpool, it's kind of what it sounds like, but also kind of not. It's not like it's essentially Gwenpool's deal is that she's like a real life person who makes a OC character who is a mixture of Gwen Stacy and Deadpool, and then she gets isekai'd into the Marvel universe. Is essentially the conceit, and it's a really fun comic. It's really enjoyable. It has like really nice art. And I love the fact that it's not annoying. And I thought it was going to be super annoying, especially because I find Deadpool is like very hit or miss. So I was like, Deadpool adjacent. As far as DC goes, I have my two big DC characters that I will ride or die with, even though I have never seen anyone even try to do a movie for them, is Booster Gold and Dr. Fate. I adore both of these heroes. No one gives a shit. No one in Hollywood gives a shit about Booster Gold or Dr. Fate, and it is such a goddamn shame because they're both so interesting.
Okay, so Dr. Fate, I'll definitely give you. Booster Gold, sir.
Oh,
Why?
I love
Also-
Booster Gold. I think Booster Gold is so funny. I think it's such a funny idea for a superhero. I get this every time I say I love Booster Gold.
Will give you that. He's a delight. I have to admit, I've never read a solely Booster Gold comic in my life. Do they? Like,
there are some. I think Booster Gold is.
I will have to now.
I think Booster Gold is better as. I mean, I've said this. Another Marvel hero I love, Doctor Strange. It's sort of has a similar thing going on where it's like I love Doctor Strange's solo stories, but Doctor Strange and Booster Gold both have this thing where it's like I like them on their own, but when they're like a supporting character in someone else's comic, that's where their best attributes can like really come out.
I'm with you for that, definitely for Doctor Strange. Especially, have you ever seen Daredevil and Doctor Strange interact? It's delightful. Because like in some runs, Daredevil has no idea what's happening 90% of the time around Doctor Strange because his like powers of echolocation, everything don't really work on magic, so he's just sitting there being like, "What is happening?" And it's great.
What's going on?
Yeah, it's great because there's one arc in Rebirth where Doctor Strange is literally summoning Mephisto, a demon from hell, to talk to Daredevil, and it's just a great little interaction where he's just like, I have no idea what's happening, but that's Mephisto. Why is he here now? And it was great.
Yeah, I love Doctor Strange appearing in other character stories. I feel like this. We'll get to the MCU later, but
that's fair.
The last one I want to get to is the Hulk, which the Hulk is not. I wouldn't say my favorite superhero, but some of the Hulk's runs in the last 10 years have absolutely been like in my all times. Like especially, I don't know if you've read Immortal Hulk, but Immortal Hulk is.
I know of it.
I'm a sucker for body horror. This is a known fact about me. So, and I'm also a sucker for cosmic horror. So the idea, so taking the Hulk and being like, okay, let's do cosmic horror Hulk, who also has like horrifying body horror, radiation shit happening, and also Joe Fixit occasionally. It's a great run. It's fantastic.
I find Hulk runs for me are very, very hit or miss. You either do a really great Hulk or you don't. For me,
totally.
like when I pick it up, there's generally no in between.
Oh yeah, there's like I feel like a Hulk run is either like every time I pick up a Hulk book, I'm like, okay, this is going in my library for life or the dumpster.
Did you read the one where the Hulk becomes a baseball player?
What?
I love comics.
Can I talk about this comic?
Oh my god,
it is so problematic.
This is the fucking Metal Gear Solid episode all over again. It's me being exposed to stories I don't know about.
Oh, dude, Hulk lore is insane.
Oh my god, please, yeah, Marie-Soleil, go ahead.
Okay, I'm starting this out with this is problematic with blackface.
Oh, okay. Oh no.
So, there was a comic book run where the Hulk and Bruce Banner were kind of like in the last Avengers movie. They're coinciding the same body. He's big, he's green, but he's got Banner's brains, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's dating Betty. No, Betty. Bleh. Not Betty. Is it Betty? Yes, it is Betty. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm on cold meds, so. And he's going around like wrapped in bandages to disguise the fact that he's green, hiding his identity. Well, he and Betty are walking past a baseball stadium. A ball comes flying out of the stadium. He catches it, throws it back into the stadium. So naturally, they want him on the baseball team, right? but the Hulk can't be on a baseball team. No. So they paint his skin. And instead of painting him to make him look white, they make him black.
Oh
Or,
my
well, brown.
god!
Yeah.
Oh
And
gosh.
he becomes this great picture. And then the Rhino is on the opposite team and he ends up fighting the Rhino, who's like way overpowered. Like he doesn't need his Rhino super suit. He's overpowered and can actually hold his own against the Hulk. So the Hulk might be like underpowered as well. I'm not entirely sure how it works.
What the fuck?
This is the chaos that I love in
What the? Oh my god!
Dean,
comics.
just I mentioned I name dropped him earlier, but I don't know if you're aware of who Joe Fixit is in Hulk lore. Dean, are you familiar with Joe Fixit?
No, what is this?
Joe Fixit. Joe Fixit is Hulk's mobster persona. Where look up Joe Fixit.
Oh my god!
Here, I'll post something. He looks insane. It's the Hulk. I swear I'm not. This is the only thing I'm going to say about the MCU before we actually get to that point, because I've got a lot to say. But I will say that Hulk runs are one of the things that make me like just so disappointed with how the Hulk is treated in the MCU. Because I need MCU Joe Fixit. I need it so badly, and I'm never going to get it.
I want to see thing. I want to see
I want to see the thing too.
What is this? Oh my god. Oh my god. I thought that was Kingpin for a second.
No.
Oh
This
my god.
is a large part of the reason why I love comic books. Because this exists in the same universe, technically, as your super, like, important, angsty Hulk stories where he's, like, on a quest to cure himself, and he also happens to be a baseball player, that one.
Well, this is one of the things that
With Ryan.
I make a controversial statement here and say this is one of the reasons I do enjoy Marvel more than DC, because I do love DC's flexibility with their characters and how like they can reboot their characters in such creative new environments. But one of the things I love about Marvel is how it's basically been one continuity from like start to finish, and how insane and unhinged shit gets when it's just allowed to exist for this long, and people still have to like come up with like new scenarios, like Cowboy Ultron in the 90s.
So, you're right, and it's hilarious, but Deadpool 2019 run actually did a really interesting thing with that premise, where they took quote-unquote back issues and just shoved Deadpool into them at random times and technically made them canon. It was really, really great, because like they snuck in a whole entire tragic backstory that you didn't realize until you read all of them in a row. But like, there's one point where now canonically Deadpool has worn the Iron Man suit and got drunk in it. And that's a thing they have to deal with for the rest of the series and universe implications. And I love that.
Oh my god, that's so cool. That's really creative. Fuck the blackfacing, but Jesus, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, comics are just so cool. They're very like flexible, I think. Just overall, like Gabe was talking about like the flexibility of DC, but like really comics are just like the comic medium is just flexible completely.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean to kind of talk about my favorite character and my favorite runs.
Yes, sorry I took so long.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So my favorite character is Spider-Man, or at least just the persona.
Awesome.
Or just like the mantle of Spider-Man. There have been many different interpretations of Spider-Man, not just in comics, but in like movies, TV shows, games. Personal favorite Spider-Man is from the game. And I think so in the game, definitely, and Miles from Into the Spider-Verse. And when we talk more about like adaptations, like I'm assuming we'll be talking about adaptations because Gabe was wanting to talk about the MCU, but
Yes.
just adaptation wise, like it's Spider-Verse and the game and the PS4 game that made me like really sell, or it really just told me just how badass and how awesome Spider-Man is. Like there were how many movies out there, but it's those that really kind of like made me believe, I think. And I grew up on those same movies too, right? And I love all the movies, but just I don't know what it was about I don't know what it was about like Spider-Verse and the game, but that's what made me love Spider-Man and say that he's my favorite character. That being said, some of my favorite runs, I feel basic for I don't know if I feel basic for saying this, but Flashpoint, it's very
Nice.
yeah, it's very interesting. It's everyone knows what Flashpoint is, and I haven't read it personally, but just like the implication of the entire universe resetting because of Barry like running back in time to save his mom. That's so cool. Like the implications for like the state of DC is one thing, but just like that much for one person, that is really telling of a very good character. As for the implications of DC, to go on that bit, a friend of mine in high school told me about the Darkest Night comics from Green Lantern. Yeah, and that was the one that kind of like helped me understand like the lore that is like the expansive and intense lore that is the Green Lantern Corps. And I'm like, dude, that's so fucking cool. That is like each corps having their own significance and relevance to DC, and just the fact that it gets so intense with Darkest Night. It's been a while since I've kind of remembered it, so forgive me for not being able to remember it. Marie-Soleil, if you want to give a quick summary for those who don't know, because I sure as fuck don't remember.
Summary on the Darkest Night?
Yeah.
Okay, just one moment.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to remember it because, like, I know this.
And then afterwards, I'll speak on some of my other favorite runs, because those aren't like superhero comics, but it's just my favorite comics.
Of course.
So it's not the Darkest Night; it's the Blackest Night.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, Blackest Night.
Yeah, and it's got Necron, who is like the superhero villain that he draws his power from the souls and spirits of everyone who's died. So it's all very dark, darkness manipulation, dark energy, necromancy, matter manipulation, dark lightning, all of that kind of stuff. He's trying to get rid of all life and emotion, and it's the Blackest Night is basically a crossover with all of the different like lantern forces that come together between the Green Lantern and Sinestro Corps. And you get all of the different lanterns, like even the Red Lanterns fight on the side of the Dark Lanterns because they want to stop like the end of the galaxy, or the universe, I guess. It's got a lot going on in it.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite part is Dexter, though.
Yeah, you told us about like that character before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just because like I don't know, like I don't know if this would make any sense, but like thinking about Blackest Night and how creative it is and how fun it is to like expand into that is kind of like writing thing. It's kind of like writing, like for me, it's kind of like writing the 7 deadly sins. There's just many ways to interpret and talk about like things that are pre-established but can be just so creative, right? And that's what makes Darkest Night or Blackest Night, even though I haven't read it, one of my favorite comic runs. On top of that, like I've mentioned Monstrous and Icarus and the Sun because they are just visually so creative. They are separate from they're separate from they're separate from like superhero comics, but they're just still so cool. I think there are some I hate to bring up Overwatch because, Activision Blizzard, but just their lore comics expanding on the lore of Overwatch, that's great. That was fun when it was big at the time. And I think webtoons, or webcomics, Lore Olympus, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful comic.
Yeah, so those are my favorites.
So I don't think I'm going to surprise anyone when I say Batman's probably one of my favorites. I really, really simultaneously hate Batman and simultaneously love Batman. It's a weird, awful situation I find myself in. Because some of them are just so good. Like Batman in The Long Halloween. I love that.
Yes.
Batman in some of the other more modern takes, not so much. I think Batman does best when they sit someone down. They're like, you have this many runs to tell your story. Go. Because otherwise, Batman, because of his popularity, reaches into all the other things, right? Another favorite character of mine is Deadpool. Because I really like Deadpool when he's done really well. Deadpool in the 2019 run, beautiful. Deadpool in Cable from 2004, beautiful character, very, very intriguing. But I have to say, one of my favorite runs is by, not runs, one of my favorite comics is by Emily Carroll, and it's called His Face is All Red. And it's a gorgeous little web comic, and she does a whole bunch of them, and they're all short, creepy stories, which I really appreciate.
Nice.
Yeah, those are my favorites. I accidentally sent you a Moon Knight cover as well. I hope you enjoy it. It is also very pretty.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, those are my favorites. So, Dean, you mentioned a lot of comics without superheroes. What is your what's your favorite? And I'll come back to everyone else as well. I know Dean really likes, well, he's been talking about a whole bunch of comics that don't have superheroes in them, so I figured I'd ask you first.
Yeah. I think it has to be Icarus and the Sun. I've already talked about that, but just the just to again rephrase quickly, it's just the creativity that not even established comic creators have. It just storytellers in general. I don't know if Gabriel Piccolo imagined Icarus and the Sun being as big as it is, or being as cherished, for me at least, as it was. He maybe just interpreted it one way, but people have been seriously wanting more of it. I especially have. And just from a storytelling perspective, it's what lets me know that comics is such a very interesting medium, whether it is about superheroes or not, because it's visual storytelling, really, and it doesn't have to be exclusive to superheroes anymore. It could be just about anything, and that's counting manga and webcomics. There's so many different ways to do either of those now. I've some of my favorite webtoons are primarily just from the app Webtoon. That's I think where most people kind of get their webtoons from. But there's like a bunch of them online. Lore Olympus for sure. I think I Love You and Let's Play, if anyone's familiar with those. And then yeah, I think just those three. So like I Love You is kind of a take on like Korean dramas, I would think. So it's like a series of love stories, or like little love stories here and there, and it's just really it's just like really well done. It's very reminiscent of K-dramas, and I stopped reading after a while, not because it was getting boring or anything, but just because I stopped reading like webcomics at that point. And the same thing goes with Let's Play. It's more of a romantic comedy compared to I Love You, but it's still like very fun, very like visually interesting. The characters are very the characters are personified and characterized really well. And I think in terms of some of the artists that I follow too, like they've been trying to do comics. Like I mentioned Art by Teslin earlier, or at Art by Teslin a little bit earlier. So yeah, I think my favorite comic that isn't relating to superheroes is Icarus and the Sun.
That's awesome. Gabe, do you have a favorite comic book that's not related to superheroes? Or comic?
I have a couple. It's okay if I name more than one?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I mean, it's just because the first one, I'm like a little shaky on whether or not I could count this as a superhero comic or not, because it definitely has those elements. But I don't want to preface this by saying I don't like the movie. I hate the movie. But the Scott Pilgrim comics are a fucking delight. Everything by Brian K. Vaughan is a goddamn delight to read.
They are.
I don't know if you read his other graphic novel Seconds, which he did a couple years back. Great graphic novel.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, I remember like in regards to Scott Pilgrim, like I knew of their existence, and like I did watch the movie, and again, when we eventually get into adaptations, like it'd be
I will get to that one.
Yeah,
I will get to it.
You already did. That's the thing.
I will get to it again.
So like just when we talk about like Scott Pilgrim, yeah, I'm unfamiliar with it, but just like they always had like such a really they always had like a really cool charm to it.
It has a very charming, very rich art style.
Yeah. It's like if I don't know if this would make any sense, but it's like it has the charm of like 16-bit and 8-bit video games.
Well, yeah, it's trying to sort of get that vibe. That was the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Because there's a whole subtext behind it that was not. I'm trying to think of other comics that I've read. The comic book series Saga. I don't know if any of y'all have read that, but that's one that I read a few years back. Absolutely adored. It's sort of like a sci-fi fantasy series about, and it's got a robot guy in it, and he's got a TV for a face. Top tier. And his name is Prince Robot. That's his canon name.
That's cool.
I think that's it for like non-superhero comics for me though.
Thanks for sharing. Sorry, that was a really awkward transition on my part. But we're just gonna steamroll through it. Marie-Soleil, do you have any comic books that aren't superheroes that you find your favorite?
Oh yes. So for actual comic books, and then I've got a couple like shot comics that I really like. But actual comic books, I really liked Spell on Wheels, which is about these 3 witches that live together in a house, and their house gets broken into. and a bunch of their witchy supplies are stolen. And they get a message from the goblin market of a bunch of witch supplies are now for sale, and go on a road trip to try to get back their lost items, including this really powerful artifact that's supposed to help witches come into their powers. Like people who they have powers, but this is supposed to help like bring them out, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really like it because it's so there was one review I read about it, and I read this after I got the book, but if this book is for the people who preferred the beast before his transformation. And it's not like a romance. It has elements of romance where they meet characters that they enjoy spending time with, but like they have places to be and things to do.
Nice.
And then for other comics, there's the webcomic Boo! It's Sex! That I told you about.
Yeah.
Where the premise of it is these 4 high school students, well, they're college students now, for their first year in college, they move into an old sorority house and find a ghost in a bottle of tequila. And she teaches them about safe sex.
I love that as a concept.
Yeah. But there's also this artist that I originally found on Tumblr, and they have a Tapas account, Tapas, Tapas, where they've done so many different awesome comics, like Bitter Ex-Heroes, which is this really short comic about these 2 normal people who ended up pulled into Fantasyland, made to fight in Fantasyland's wars. And then after they've seen people die and they've grown, they're adults now. They went into this as middle schoolers. They're adults now. The war is over and they get tossed back into middle school at 12 or 13 years old, however old it was. It's a really short. It doesn't show that part of it, but it shows the PTSD that these 2 ex-heroes had. And then Elsewhere University, because I am a bitch for the Fae.
Fair enough. If you're done, I have to say,
Yes.
My favorite non-superhero comic book it's actually bad because it's produced by Dark Horse, which is just another branch of DC, but Jenny Finn is what it's called, and it's a weird little horror story about, like, quote unquote Victorian England and like an almost corrupting influence of the sea. It gets very eldritch, very dark, and I thought it's delightful. Sadly, I did not get the last couple issues of that comic, and then they all sold out in the comic store that I was reading them for, and I haven't been able to find them. I'll buy them online one day. But I really liked that one. Another one that I really liked, and I want to talk a little bit about, is Mouse, which was a comic book that, well, technically graphic novel. And Marie-Soleil was telling me earlier in the week that the difference is that a graphic novel has a whole contained story, while comic books don't have the entire story in one shot. And yeah, it blew my mind as well. Yeah. So Mouse is one of the first comic books that made me realize that comic books don't have to be superheroes. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. It's a really, really interesting comic about the Jewish experience with World War II and generational trauma. And it's interesting because everything is given, they're not people, so all the Jewish people are mice, all the Nazis are cats, all the Americans are dogs, and they examine it through kind of that they examine it through a very interesting lens of generational trauma and storytelling. Also, all the French people are frogs. So, yeah, no.
Wee wee.
Apparently. I don't know.
I mean, it could have been snails.
It could have been.
What are the two things French people are known for? Eating frog legs and eating snails.
You had to pick one.
You are correct. But no, it's a great little comic. Also, I'd say there's some manga I really, really like, and I'm not sure if I can lump it in with the same comic book genre as superheroes. Well, at least not some of them, because manga is kind of mind-boggling because it has so many different genres in and of itself. And while I don't read it a lot now, I used to because I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, but I was able to get my hands on online versions of manga. So some of those are really near and dear to my heart, and Naruto was definitely one of them as a 12-year-old. But I'm not sure whether that counts as a superhero or not. Naruto kind of toes the line, because there's definitely some superhero-like powers in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with manga, it's kind of like its own thing at this point. The comparison the comparison can be made between both being visual stories with art per page and stuff, and there's text bubbles. Technically there are comparisons, but they just feel like their own separate thing. You can't really compare Batman to Chainsaw Man. That's unfair.
Mm-hmm. I didn't want to talk about manga while I was talking about favorite non-superhero comics, because I feel like it's a different. I need a whole different section for that.
There might be a whole different podcast episode.
Yeah. See, I haven't read it in so long that I know what you mean by the fact that it has a completely different vibe. I can't articulate what that is because I haven't read any in a very long time. But yeah, you're completely right.
Mm-hmm. I think with I don't know if this would make any sense, but with comics, the persona and the central character themselves is the more fantastical element around them. But with shonen and with shonen and with manga, really, just it's the protagonist serves more as a lens into a fantastical world. Does that make any sense? How I'm seeing this is that when you are Batman, you see the story around you is written as whichever iteration of Batman there is, and whether that's a darker interpretation or a darker iteration or a more comical iteration, the world kind of plays in its own kind of flavor to the Batman that is being presented. But in manga, it's the main protagonist is usually just a small, they may be a chosen one hero, but there are so many insane and fantastical ideas around around that one character that just makes it so much more of an interesting look into creativity. I think it's just examining creativity. That's always how I've kind of viewed comics and manga. It's manga's insanity and creativity is all taking place outside the canon of just the main characters, whereas the main character of a comic is just so recognizable and I don't want to say deified, but it's just kind of they're just so immortal and entrenched in a lot of people's thing that you read a Spider-Man story or a Batman story to see what Spider-Man or Batman does. But with manga, it's so many different characters each somehow equal to each other, but still completely on their own level. I don't know if that made any sense, but just
No, I think I understand what you're saying. I think especially shonen manga and shonen anime, there's an emphasis on like an ensemble.
that's what it is. Yeah, the focus on the ensemble. Yeah, because I think
Makes sense to me.
yeah, because it's like with like you can tell, like the thing is you can tell like a character, like you can tell like a Bruce Wayne and Batman story with just Selena Kyle. I think you can do that if there is a version of that exists. Like you can do it. Like everyone knows who these characters are, but a lot of manga, especially like popular manga such as Naruto, Demon Slayer, like a lot of these are very recent. They haven't been as long running as Batman and Western comics have been. So it's not that it has a lot of catching up to do, but the focus on an ensemble means that there's just so many characters in a manga, right? Like you may start off with your protagonist, some side characters here and there, but then it just gets incredibly expansive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool. It's a neat lens to look at it through. Right? Because, like, once again, my primary comic reading is definitely superheroes, and superhero stories are built on one singular individual. And while the universe may be full of, like, 7 of those singular individuals, it still very much focuses on one character, unless there's, like, a special cameo from another one.
Yeah.
Or you're reading something like the Justice League, right? And then if you're reading the Justice League, it's because some mind-shattering, universe-altering event is happening, generally.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why I think maybe that's, like, it's kind of like again, I don't know if this will make any sense, but tying into what we're talking about, it's the reason why rogues galleries exist, or like the conversations about rogues galleries is such a interesting thing, because there are Spider-Man's rogues, there are Wonder Woman's rogues, there's Superman's like iconic villains, there are Batman's iconic villains, the Flash's iconic villains, there's like there are like the X-Men's iconic, like with Western comics there are so many villains and heroes that are just so intertwined that it's hard to separate them at all. Like Batman and Joker is one of the most is like one of the most iconic comic rivalries out there. You can't have Batman without the Joker sometimes, and it's really difficult to kind of separate the two. Whereas in manga, it's everyone is so every single character may have rivalries, sure, but it's not as like interconnected as like two characters are, and that's because of the focus on an ensemble, because there's just so many to keep up with.
I think one of the other things that might affect that is that the two main players, and I'm sorry, independent comic publishers, but the two main players right now, DC and Marvel, have worked since like the 40s to have their characters interact in one cohesive universe. So if you went up to DC right now and were like, here's my dude, he's named Chairman, I want him in a completely other universe than anyone else, they'd be like, hell no.
They'd be like, yeah, no.
You get in with the rest of the superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of... Oh, sorry.
Where in manga, like, I feel like stories and artists and writers have more room to breathe and create their own world for their comics.
You know, I'll definitely
Just
say...
like...
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just gonna say, I also think, like, historically, I think the Comics Code Authority fucked Western comics for like a good 20 to 30 years.
Someone brought that up.
And like, I think, because I mean, you mentioned Chainsaw Man. What's my profile picture? You know, I think Chainsaw Man is a great example, because Chainsaw Man is widely considered to be a shonen manga, which is like it's like that's like a comic book for young boys. Chainsaw Man regularly has its main character decapitating people, eviscerating monsters, just the horrifying shit is happening. This is the shit this is like the tame zone. This is the okay zone. This is the PG-13 area. I think, and like I don't mean this in like a pretentious like, ugh, Japan is better. I'm not being a weeb right now. Well, I do gotta say I do wish Western comics like now that like there is more of like a freedom to do some gutsy shit. I wish they did. I wish they did more often, and I wish it wasn't like you know what the thing is. You know what the thing is that I feel like in Western comics there's sort of this stigma surrounding graphic content where it's like, okay, you've put a horrible scene where someone gets bludgeoned to death in this Batman comic, so now the entire tone of this run has to now reflect that, and now we're doing a dark Batman run where it's gritty and realistic. Whereas I think with manga, there's a lot more of a freedom to just have super gory shit in a story that is overall very lighthearted. Like I would say Chainsaw Man is basically Fujimoto has basically said Chainsaw Man is an homage to like the superhero films that he grew up on. Like it's like the ending panel of the last chapter of Chainsaw Man is literally an homage to the first Spider-Man movie where he's like unbuttoning his shirt and he has like the stuff, except instead of a symbol it's his ripcord.
I love it.
I'm gonna see if I can find that panel. Hang on, because it's great. But yeah, I feel like I'm not like, I don't know when the Comics Code Authority stopped having like as much of a stranglehold over the industry, but like its consequences are definitely still there, and I feel like the culture of comics in America is one where it's like, okay, are you making a fun story? Okay, then there are certain content that's just not allowed. Are you making a story with darker content? Okay, so now the whole story has to be super gritty and realistic. And I feel like manga is a little better with that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think to like weigh in on that, I'm unfamiliar with the Comics Code Authority, but just from a creative perspective, how I kind of see it is that because Marvel and DC have just been so entrenched in like popular culture, not just Western popular culture, but like global culture for so long now, people know who Superman is. People know who Batman and Spider-Man and the X-Men are. We all are familiar with what defines these characters, that it's very hard to try to be creative with them anymore. Like you can put them into different time periods, but they ultimately end up becoming some version of themselves. There's very few room, not just for like, there is room for creativity obviously, but just for adaptability, it's kind of hard to take a familiar character and put them in a completely new storyline, not just in a new setting, but like a completely different story, because they either become themselves or become a different version of themselves, or are just adapting based on the tone. With manga, there is really no established like collective community. Like Demon Slayer is different from Attack on Titan, and Attack on Titan is different from Naruto, and Naruto is different from and Naruto is different from like My Hero. Each of them are just so visually and creatively different, because manga can be associated with any one of those stories. A lot of it, like a lot of people mostly view it as shonen, but at the same time there's slice of life anime, there's slice of life manga, there is like dark realistic manga, there is Junji Ito. There are so many ways to be creative with manga that isn't exclusive to a collective, if that makes any sense. Like, if you're reading a Junji Ito story, then you're reading a Junji Ito story. If you're reading like My Hero, then you're reading My Hero. But ultimately, you can still separate those two and not have it be defined by some other previous example. Like, there are still tropes and stuff, sure, but there's not any kind of pre-established continuity. You can say whatever story you want in manga, but in comics, like, if you're going to tell a Batman story, like, there's some kind of expectation there. Like, if you want to introduce a new villain, sure, but how long until you reintroduce familiar villains? Like, you may like introduce a new love interest, but how long until you eventually just see Selena Kyle or some of the other love interests again? Like, you may try to but you may try to create your own original story, but is it going to be weighing up to Dark Knight Returns or The Killing Joke? It's hard because there is so much history behind these comics. And while that is a good thing, while there is a lot of like good to having such long running, established, like iconic characters, you can't be fresh with it anymore. It's hard to be, at least.
See, I would argue that, like, the things that are detracted from Marvel and DC by having a shared universe are also supplemented by the shared universe. Almost. Because I read a whole bunch of comics, and part of the reason why I love them is that you have this expansive universe where everyone is almost interacting. And I'm not going to say that every once in a while I'm just like, kick Gotham out of the DCU. Just kick it out. No one needs, like, Batman. He's a regular dude in tights. He's a furry that goes out at night and beats people up. Like, you're telling me he's competing with the flying Jesus metaphor? Like, it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, some of my favorite comic books rely on these characters that everyone knows and is very familiar with playing off each other. So yeah, you're right. I feel like if you're a writer or an artist, you are limited to writing in that universe and limited to writing on that model. But I also feel like people who write and draw comics for DC and Marvel are really hardcore fans for that specific hero, right? Because I feel like anyone writing or drawing Batman should, because every once in a while there's some real terrible Batman comics, should just be a really big fan of Batman. And they should be able to play with that and tell stories. And another thing on that same vein is I like how comics evolve for every generation. Especially superhero comics, because it's like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash. I'm trying to think of some Marvel characters here, and I'm really drawing a blank, so I do apologize. Shazam, that's not a Marvel character. Darn it, his name is Captain Marvel, but he's not a Marvel character. Those comic books and characters have grown up with each generation, and that's where you kind of get, like, the different ages, right? Because originally they started off as basically war propaganda. And before that, they were essentially stories of new immigrants coming into some places after being displaced, Superman, or someone dealing with urban crime, Batman. And they evolved through each generation to mean something to each of those generations. Because Batman, and I can tell you this because I've read some truly, truly interesting comics recently. And Daredevil is actually a huge one of these. It evolves for what people are going through in that time. So if you read Daredevil, and I'm going to use this one because I bring up a lot of DC, but I also do love Marvel. Don't get angry at me, Marvel. Daredevil, when he first comes out, is just dealing with crime and crime, and corruption in the police force, and then the comic books code came out, so he couldn't actually talk about how the police were corrupt. So he was just dealing with crime, and then later on, when things relaxed, he was able to deal with drug problems, and there's even a couple of issues that deal with the idea of the AIDS crisis. And then that evolved to now Daredevil's dealing with gentrification of Hell's Kitchen. And it's a direct reflection to what's happening right now. And I think a reflection of that is the shared universe and the fact that they're published so quickly that they can publish on current events, which isn't something you find in regular media. I will stop talking now, though.
I mean, that is a good point. Like, when you have such iconic, like, when you have icons more than characters, then you can write them in pretty much any period. Because Superman's inherent, like, nature to be good and do good has resonated with, like, certainly his incarnation when it could be just, you know, propaganda. But nowadays, it's nowadays, like, his being a symbol of hope is one for anyone. Like, same thing with Batman. Like, the messages behind Batman and Iron Man, you don't have to have like extraordinary abilities to be extraordinary. You have to be rich, but you don't have to be superhuman. Like, that resonates with people. Like, it's because, like, I agree with you, Lee, that like the timelessness of like Marvel and DC and comic storytelling in general just makes it adaptable for any generation.
Yeah. Sorry about the long rant. I just feel very, very passionate about comics.
I really liked that. That was really good.
Okay, I'm glad.
There's something I wanted to add though too.
Go for it.
When they do try to, because they do try to step out and change their known characters, like there's a graphic novels from DC called Gotham High, where Batman, Bruce Wayne, is 16 years old at high school. He's also half Chinese. Alfred is his uncle, his gay uncle. Has I can't remember if it's a husband or a boyfriend, but he is in a romantic relationship with another man. And all of these things, it fell flat to a lot of people because the Batman that everybody knew and everything is womanizer, playboy, Brucey Wayne, right?
Yeah.
And by making him into this different character, it felt like they were pandering. Whereas what people want, like, people say that's what they want, and it often falls flat. Whereas when they come up with a new character that fits that niche, it's oftentimes better received, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I totally know what you mean.
Cool.
Because, like, I feel like, once again, we're on that, like, negatives and positives of having a really well-established universe.
Yeah.
In Batman Earth 1, they messed around with Batman's backstory as well, and Alfred wasn't really his butler. He was just this random security officer that his parents were like, well, you saved my life, so now you're in charge of my son. And Alfred has to deal with that. And I thought that was a really interesting take on it. But once again, like, it was still very recognizable as Batman, and it didn't seem like pandering the same way taking one of these iconic characters and changing them almost does in some instances. Because there's nothing I hate more than when they change a character in a very important way, like you gave an example of, and then it doesn't affect the rest of the story, which is something I feel like happens to comic book characters a lot, where if they change a key facet of their backstory or personality to become more inclusive, they kind of shy away from having that affect the rest of the story, which is part of the reason why, like, Into the Spider-Verse and Miles Morales is such a great character, because they took Spider-Man, they made him a black person with a different background and different powers, and then that affects the actual story. It's different from the original one, but they wrote him his own story and his own powers, which makes the character seem more real, rather than just doing Batman, changing him into half Chinese person and then not having it affect the story too much overall. which I think is why the smaller characters like Duke or Signal in the new Gotham, like, Bat Fam works so well because Duke is a full, interesting character. And his backstory and his personhood and everything that makes him him is interesting. It's new, it's fresh, and it affects it. Where they kind of have to tiptoe around some of the larger characters because you can't affect their story or their themes too much.
Yes.
Otherwise,
Like,
because you go first.
I was going to say, you reminded me, when you mentioned Duke, that reminded me of Terry from Batman Returns, I think. It's not the comics, but like the animated series or movies.
The edgy 2000s Batman reboot. Yeah.
Yeah. Where Bruce Wayne is no longer I want to say he's dead. I can't remember though, or retired or something. He's not Batman anymore.
Retired.
Batman is somebody else.
Yeah, he's old and crotchety. Terry took over because you needed even more edge than Batman originally has.
And Terry goes around and his face mask fully covers his entire face, and you can't, like, there's no mouth. It's terrifying.
Holy fuck. That's insane.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Batman Beyond. But sorry, Dean, I feel like we accidentally cut you off a lot.
Oh,
Did
no,
you
it's
have
okay.
anything you wanted to share?
Just a couple things, actually. One was going to transition into a new topic, if that's all right, but just like...
oh, yeah, go for it.
Like, on a note on, like, inclusivity and nuance, I think, like, it's difficult to do that, and I'll touch on nuance really quick. Like, it's difficult to do that with established characters, like, especially for Marvel and DC, because, I'm pretty sure, like, we all kind of, like, subtly acknowledge it, or maybe we haven't touched on it completely, but gatekeeping is a pretty terrible thing in any medium, and especially in comics, because, like, everyone knows who Bruce Wayne's Batman is. Everyone knows who Peter Parker's Spider-Man is, and there are some very diehard loyalists that are willing to protect that kind of adaptation for him. And you know what? Like, it's hard for me to kind of, like, say that, you know, it's okay for the character to change. Like, if they're as established as Peter Parker is, like, tweaking like the age that he becomes Spider-Man, and that's okay, but ultimately, like, there's nothing wrong with sticking to who Peter Parker is as a character, and trying to change that, like, too drastically without any kind of, like, actual nuance and, like, social awareness just makes it pandering. It's just poorly done to the point where everyone can see right through it. But that being said, like, there are now ways to do that, and especially with, like, superheroes, you can have multiple Spider-Men, you can have multiple Flashes, you can have different interpretations of the persona, and that's, I think, what people kind of forget. Like, when they're being defensive of Batman or the Flash, like, maybe they're being defensive over Bruce Wayne as a character, or Bruce Wayne as Batman, or as Peter Parker as Spider-Man, because, like, people know those characters, and trying to change the canon that, like, those characters are, maybe that's what people struggle with. So you can always just create a new character. If you want to create an inclusive, like, Batman, then just create a new character. And that sounds like such an easy solution, right? But to me, that's maybe just how it would freshen things up too, because at the same time, like, you have the opportunity to just create a new persona, a new mantle for this iconic presence, right? Yeah. And yeah, so that's kind of me touching on nuance. What I wanted to talk about and transition into, like, between, like, comics and, like, comics both relating to DC and like, when, like, as we're talking about like different interpretations, we should definitely talk about adaptations now, especially outside of comics, because just it's so interesting just how people have like interpreted like comics into different forms of media. And I feel like it'd be good to start with Spider-Verse, because Spider-Verse is just a celebration of Spider-Man. It's I'm gonna talk about No Way Home too, which is also a which is also an adaptation of Spider-Man. Like kind of off topic, but I was asked this a long time ago in that like, which was your favorite movie? Spider-Verse or No Way Home? And I say Spider-Verse because it is celebrating Spider-Man as a character, whereas No Way Home celebrates Peter Parker. Does that make any sense? Like it's like No Way Home sticks to what makes Peter Parker such a beloved character. Like it's the awkward charm. It's the like lovability of his personality. It's his willingness to do good all the time, and it's his sacrifices inherently that No Way Home celebrates. But in Spider-Verse, that it's Peter Parker that is the stepping stone to a multiverse of Spider-Man that really embraces the fact that anyone can be Spider-Man. And they're pretty upfront with that message too. Like in the movie, anyone can be Spider-Man. And that is beautiful to look at, because when a presence so iconic as Spider-Man, and this is just Spider-Man, becomes so much more than just one person, then an adaptation and like an adaptation is perfect, because sometimes a character just becomes so beloved that you should not just find them in comics. Like they have to be available, or they have to be shown to a wider audience. And like Spider-Verse, I think, is maybe one of the best ways of like blending together like good storytelling, like lots of like visual elements, the direction and beauty of video editing, while also sticking true to a very comic book flavor to it, and it's awesome.
I have to say, Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite well, actually that's a lie. One of my favorite visual medias where they incorporate the sheer history and like sheer magnitude of the comic book universe. And it's done beautifully. Like each character has their own distinct animation style, and when you watch them, they have their own distinct version of movement, which I think really accurately reflects how many different versions of their characters there have been and have been animated recently. Because like adaptations are always very, very interesting for comics, because I find adaptations are either really, really well done or really, really poorly done. And like some, I think comic books work better as adaptations to cartoons than they ever will to live action.
Oh, totally.
But that is just my own opinion.
Does that segue us into the MCU? Because holy shit, we should talk about the MCU.
I was going to give everyone else a chance to talk about adaptations if they wanted to put something in, and then yes, that was a direct.
Oh, fuck, I'm so sorry.
Point and laugh at the MCU.
Sorry.
So no problem. Anyone else have anything you want to talk about just for adaptations in general?
I just want to make one point that we can't, like, a lot of people, I use the term people loosely, a lot of people think that you can just focus on the comic books and know everything, and it's like, works perfectly fine if you only want to know what's in those comic books. But there is so much more information about these characters in other medias. Like Harley Quinn would not exist without the animated Batman series,
which is the best adaptation ever.
And she was in the animated series, and they moved her in the comics, and they made her story a lot darker in the comics because they were able to, because it wasn't like directed towards children. Whereas even though in the comics they literally show like the Joker beating her till she's black and blue, or like whatever, having her hospitalized, and then there's a note from him being like with a flower telling her to get better, and she's all lovey-dovey forgiving him again, which is pretty dark for an animated TV show for kids. But the comics make it so much darker and so much more real.
I'm always surprised with what they got away with in that animated series, if I'm completely honest.
Oh, the shit
Because
with
it was supposed to be like directed towards. Sorry, it was supposed to be directed towards young teens. So like 10, 11, and 12-year-olds was their quote-unquote demographic, and then they do that, and then they do some baby doll, and then they do like some really dark things.
Everything with Robin
But it was
at the beginning of oh, sorry.
No, I'm just on a delay. So I was done talking.
I know.
Sorry.
I keep thinking that like I'm not interrupting. The delay is like messing me up a little bit. But I was just gonna say like everything that happens to fucking Robin at the beginning of Return of the Joker, I think it's called.
Yeah, JJ, Joker Jr.
How'd they get away with that?
The reason they got away
fucked up.
The reason they got away with it is because originally they were going to kill Robin.
Yeah.
But they couldn't depict that. So
so this was better?
They had yes, that was the alternative to killing Robin. That was quote unquote better due to the restrictions of the channel they were on. And it's really funny because I was watching an interview and it went right away right around this inability to kill characters, and I think it turned out worse. And it's true.
It's so much worse.
Much better
just kill him.
Murder Robin
But it made such an interesting story, though.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it did make a delightfully interesting story.
That is one of the things where it's like I think unintentionally, of course, I don't want to give the Comics Code Authority any credit. Unintentionally, the Comics Code Authority had like a beneficial effect on the industry because like there were a lot of instances where creators had to like think around the rules that these fucking dickheads were putting on their comic books and their media, and like that has led to like some of the most iconic aspects of the characters. Like Batman's whole no killing rule didn't fucking exist before the Comics Code Authority was like, hey guys, we can't have you kill people in the comic. He needs to not kill people.
Yeah, straight up. He used to murder people. Yeah, beautiful.
I'm pretty sure in one of the old comics, he fucking hangs a guy from his plane.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Oh, that is a story. That is. I can talk about that. If you want me to talk about that, I can talk about that.
Oh, go for it.
Go for it.
So, I can't remember which villain it is, but one of them is experimenting on mentally ill people. These people are not in control of themselves, but it makes them big and it makes them strong, whatever they're doing to them, and it makes them violent.
Mm.
And there's one of these people in the back of this truck, and Batman catches him around, and then you see the plane flying away with the guy dangling below it, and it doesn't say that he's dead, but he's flying up away with the guy dangling from him, and then later on you find out that they had a cure. They could have fixed this guy.
Oh my god!
I've seen that panel like a million times. I never knew what the backstory was. That is so much worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck.
But yeah, like that's the whole thing, because it's like Batman. That like I remember like people always drawing that when the no killing rule gets debated, because they're like, oh, and the old comics are killed, but like it was one of the whole things, because Comics Code Authority was like, hey, because like all superheroes had a no killing rule, but then like in the later on it became like an integral part of his character. It's just interesting how some of that stuff comes about, and like the Robin thing in Return of the Joker is just another great example of that. How this shit just comes out of rules.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So something that I think we should talk about when we're talking to adaptions is the fact that I'm not sure if Marvel does this. I'm not actually certain, because if you guys can tell, I read a lot more DC than I read Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
But we talk a lot, and we're going to talk a lot about or live action movies or animated movies or like radio shows or a whole host of other things. But DC at least does a really interesting thing where if it has a release, it'll turn it into a comic book. So like there's a really actually delightful and charming Superman started as a radio show. So they took the script of the radio show and then they drew animations and not animations, they drew art for it, and so now it's like a 3-series comic book, and I find that really interesting. Another example is Gods and Monsters, which is like my favorite Justice League comic book ever. Originally started as a standalone little animated feature. Sorry. Well, we were on adaptations. I just had to go over that because I really like how open DC is to like, it was successful, let's make more money, print another comic.
I'm trying to think of like adaptations, not MCU or DCU, and not like movies that I've already talked about earlier in the episode. But
Scott Pilgrim.
Scott Pilgrim.
I'll get to that. I want to say something positive first. I'm not quite in my ranting state yet. I want to talk about positive. I want to talk about my favorite comic book adaptation, and it's DC. It's not Teen Titans. Shockingly, it was Teen Titans in the old days, and Teen Titans is a very close second. But much in the same vein, fucking Young Justice.
Mm-hmm.
So fucking good. I have
the
a
animated or the live action?
Animated Young Justice, not Titans. No. The cartoon Young Justice.
Okay, you now have my full support.
Yeah, I have a firm belief that there are two kinds of people who think Young Justice is the best DC cartoon, and people who have not seen Young Justice. I will go to my grave believing that shit. I still have yet to watch the latest season that is still ongoing, but I remember that the day I found out that they were doing more Young Justice, it was like a hole in my chest was filled. It's a great series. If you haven't watched Young Justice, please go watch it. It's all on Netflix. It's such a good like take on the sidekick thing. It's a great series. Please watch Young Justice.
It's a good show. Since we're still on adaptations, can I talk about Teen Titans though, since you brought it up?
Please, I would love to also talk about Teen Titans because Teen Titans is also
the best.
Do you know why they canceled the original Teen Titans TV series?
Am I about to get really mad?
I do think I actually know. It was because it was too popular with girls, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that sounds weird. So it was really popular with its female audience, but they weren't marketing it towards the female audience. They weren't marketing it for the girls. All of the toys and everything were for boys.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't making money off of the toys and everything. So they were like, oh, it's not successful. Let's scrap it. And then they come out with the Teen Titans Go. This abomination where they have Raven do the potty dance, where they bring her demonic father for Thanksgiving dinner, and then they turn Batman into a turkey.
I don't think about Teen Titans Go.
I try not to actively think about it.
I try. Oh my god.
in an interview, they literally said, one of the creators, writers or something said, that boys don't want that kind of thing. Boys want poop jokes and fart jokes. So that's why they made Teen Titans Go. Because boys want fart jokes.
So
they're not wrong, but like,
yeah, I'm angry. Just I hate that you. Oh my god, I think Raven's side story in Teen Titans, especially that one fucking episode where she splits into multiple different versions of herself, and the interactions between her and her father, and wrestling not to be like the terrible presence that he is one of my favorite childhood stories. And
you know what's crazy is the same fucking thing happened with Young Justice too. This just keeps happening.
Producers, writers, girls like this stuff. We like the deep stories. Boys like it too. You can touch on the hard topics. Kids get it.
Yeah. Have any of you seen fucking Arcane?
Like, you don't need to make everything funny and gross for people to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And make toys for everybody. Don't gender your toys.
The InkGuild would like to now formally acknowledge fuck gender norms.
Yes.
Yep.
I don't know where the Teen Titans that's on Netflix came from. I don't know what spawned that mess.
Oh,
but
I don't even want to get into that one. I don't even.
Oh no.
I was not present for the CW episode, but like, was it talked about? I don't know if that's not CW, but it's CW adjacent.
No.
It has CW vibes.
It sure does. It's.
Speaking of the CW,
oh no!
Fuck everything that they've done.
Why did I say that name?
So technically, Riverdale is an adaptation of the Archie comics.
We can talk about Riverdale, can't we?
Where's Alex?
So, I have a story, and I took a comic book course in university. And my professor was a dude who absolutely adored the Archie comics. And he got to the point where, like, at one point, he wrote some Archie comics before he was a professor. And I can remember we came into school, I came into class one day, and he went on this, like, super excited rant about how great Riverdale was going to be because it was amazing. And I didn't actually, like, the semester ended before Riverdale started, but I really want to know how he feels about it. I would pay for that man's, like, opinion on Riverdale. Because it's just so not actually based off of anything.
I can't even begin to bring myself to talk about the DCEU or the DCCW, because for one thing, I only know about maybe a third of it because that's how long I stayed. And what I can say, fuck everything about it. Fuck most things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Like, when I didn't know any better and I was when I didn't know any better, I was kind of forgiving of it, but just, oh my god. Just the focus on the melodrama, or like the unnecessary focus on like some of the melodrama between the dialogue, and just the completely blatant, like, pandering to the CW's audience, which is a bunch of like preteen people.
So, shall we switch to, quite frankly, like, I'm of the multiple choice comic book theory, where if you don't like a run or like a scene, it doesn't exist anymore. And that is mainly my opinion of most live action adaptations of comic books.
Mm-hmm.
But shall we talk about the MCU?
Let's talk about the MCU. Let's talk about let's talk about the shit. Let's talk about the shit show.
Okay, before we start,
Lee, you are the
what is
host.
everyone's least favorite adaptation in the MCU?
In the MCU?
I am the host. Yes. So let's start from Marie-Soleil to add some structure back to the shenanigans. If you have a least favorite adaptation in the MCU, what would it be? Marie-Soleil, do you have one?
All of it.
Valid. I support it.
I have issues with partially because like the different MCU movies have different like creative teams behind it, different directors and writers on it. They aren't cohesive. But like
This is true.
shit hit the fan with Civil War. I feel like that's where it really started getting like where they really started getting off of the characterization they had. Civil War took them in a completely different turn from where the Avengers was going. And I found out part of it is to blame with the fact that DC put out Batman versus Superman, apparently. The original Captain America was supposed to go in a different direction. It wasn't supposed to be Civil War yet. The original title had something to do with serpents.
Yeah, Serpent Society.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. I didn't know that, but that would make sense as the next one.
So, like, Civil War had to go into the whole Captain America versus Iron Man and mess with a lot of the characterization that had been built up to ahead of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thor: The Dark World, the entire thing was boring.
That's a very boring movie.
Yeah.
That is.
You couldn't like I say that in kind of one sentence, but just to elaborate a little bit, it's boring from a like film perspective, and I imagine a comic perspective, because the only character you really kind of see throughout all of the Dark World is Loki's, and that's it. Like, you kind of know Loki as like Loki's Loki, and that's not hard to like get his character right. But at the same time, if you're only getting Loki's character right, everyone else in the story felt so static that I don't know what like stories like Thor: The Dark World is based off of, but as a piece of as an adaptation, like Thor must have been like had like a lot of like charm and like personality from the comics, I would imagine, and to see everyone just so boring hurts. Like, they got Loki right. Great. Does the movie want a cookie? I don't understand.
Interesting fact about that movie, though, a lot of the times when people tell me their favorite parts of that movie, those parts were ad-libbed. The story of Loki stabbing Thor when they were kids, like being a snake, turning back into himself and stabbing Thor, that was ad-libbed. The get help scene was ad-libbed. And people mention those as the funniest moments or the best moments of the movie, and it wasn't in the script.
Yeah.
And like, it's nice for a movie. Does it have anything to do with like the actual characters in the comics? Probably not, but I mean, within its own within its like contained canon, at least the MCU understands that it's becoming its own thing. It uses a lot of familiar characters from like Marvel, but at the same time it feels, to me at least, because I wasn't familiar with, comics at the time, like it's its own special kind of thing. And that's where everyone else now comes in and is like, no, fucking here's what's wrong with it, it's all bad. I'm kidding.
And I just realized I was talking about Ragnarok, not the Dark World, because I forgot the Dark World existed, or whatever.
Everyone forgets the Dark World exists. It's garbage.
The two moments that I mentioned were from Ragnarok, not from...
Me who's editing this, let's all, like, me who's editing this, just cut everything that we've been talking about the Dark World, because no one should have to remember that.
Just delete it. It doesn't matter. But, Gabe, Least favorite adaptation in the MCU.
In the MCU, that's a tough question. I have a lot of problems with the MCU. As we found out in our MCU ranking episode, I'm a lot softer on a lot of the MCU. I can name the MCU movies that I do like on one hand: Guardians of the Galaxy 1, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, the first Infinity War movie, not Endgame, Iron Man 1, everything else. Let's talk about the Hulk. Okay, well, earlier I was talking about how great Immortal Hulk is, and then Immortal Hulk, that's one run, and then there's also great runs like there's World War Hulk, there's Planet Hulk, there's the Hulk where he's really really old and he has dreams about having sex with people. There's Hulk in other shit, Hulk and Old Man Logan, and the MCU has treated Hulk like fucking garbage from the get-go. Every time I see Hulk in the MCU, a small piece of me dies because I know that this is one of the most interesting characters they have access to, and they're not even like it's like it. They're not even doing like what I would imagine would be the bare minimum with Hulk anymore. I feel like the fact that Smart Hulk was like the most. That was the most into Hulk lore that they have gone into, and from what I can tell, that's the farthest they're going to go into. It seems like in the She-Hulk trailer, he's still Smart Hulk. Is it just Smart Hulk now? The fuck, guys, the fuck. Also, I'm just gonna say it. I know that himbo Thor is something a lot of people like, but I'm gonna say the himboification of Thor grades me to my soul. I love, especially someone who loves the first Thor movie. He's still kind of a himbo in that, but he's like it's not like he's dumb. It's like he's ignorant of like human customs, and he's just like he's just this godly alien dude who he's just here, and then like he's like a stoner by the end of Endgame. I don't like it. I don't like a lot of what happens in Endgame. By the way,
Yeah.
I feel like I mean this Endgame is just like that's just a thing that I think just comes down to the fact that I am personally not as invested in Endgame as I think a lot of people are. That's like a fan. This movie is for fans, so I do get why I didn't like that movie because I am not like as balls deep into the MCU as other people might be. Also, I can't believe I forgot Ant-Man. Can I talk about Ant-Man's production? I think I've done this on another episode, but I got to talk about Ant-Man's production. This has nothing to do with adaptation, surely. This just has everything to do with the fact that this just has.
You're mad.
I'm angry. I am angry about what happened to Edgar Wright. I will go to my fucking grave. I will go to my grave seething.
He's gonna go to his grave shitting.
I'm gonna go to my grave seething and shitting my pants. I'm just gonna be filled with farts and rage in the corpse box for what the fuck they did to Edgar Wright. So basically, for those who don't know, Edgar Wright wanted to make an Ant-Man movie. Ant-Man is his favorite superhero. He's wanted to make an Ant-Man movie for forever, and then he got his wish. Kevin Feige was like, "Hey, see, Edgar Wright, you're a very famous, popular, and prolific director with a lot of movies on your belt that people really, really love. Do you want to make Ant-Man?" And Edgar Wright was like, "Oh, fuck yeah, bro, absolutely." So then they let him make Ant-Man, and he did a test footage thing for Ant-Man that people fucking loved, and so the Ant-Man movie got like even more popular, and then he got Paul Rudd in it, and he got a bunch of actors in it, and he wrote a screenplay in it, and it was going to be like sort of an Ant-Man heist comedy. And then halfway through production, they kicked him off the movie because he didn't want to do one scene with the Falcon in it. He wanted to. He didn't. The Kevin Feige was like, "We need to have this be an Avengers tie-in," and Edgar Wright was like, This completely interrupts the flow of the story. I don't want this." And they were like, "Okay, you're fired." And it was just like that. The dream is dead, and the Edgar Wright Ant-Man is dead, and it's. it hurts me to my soul. It hurts me to the very bone of my spirit thinking about the Edgar Wright Ant-Man that could have been, especially when I know how great some of his other movies are. I don't know if any of y'all have seen some of his other movies. Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, Baby Driver.
Delightful movies.
Another adaptation I'm not talking about.
Okay.
Scott Pilgrim is the other. I think I've run the gambit on every. I think my problem with the MCU as a whole is that I don't think I think that like they're way too beholden to like a scheme, and I'm going to get to this when I'm going to elaborate this on more when I talk about the current state of the DCU. But I think
Oh dear.
right now no, in a good way though for DCU, but like I think my problem with the MCU as a whole right now is I think they're way too beholden to like a long-term scheme, and I think this leads to a lot of problems where characters like that struggle to grow or do anything interesting in their movies because everything has to be like, okay, every decision that we make in this project, we have to consider like 10 movies in the future, like how this will affect Kevin Feige's timeline. And yeah, so that's my problem with it. I think it's way too restricted, and I think it would be more fun if they let weird shit happen.
Yeah. I think if they embraced the chaos more, it would make better movies. Because, like, the thing about comic books is, like, a lot of weird shenanigans happens. There's a comic book when all the Avengers are dogs, and that's part of the continuity now, and you have to deal with that. I don't think they'll ever let that happen in the MCU. Right? But my least favorite, because I'm trying to keep this somewhat on track.
Sorry.
My least favorite is any MCU. No, it's no problem. I'm just like trying to direct us back onto course. Oh, it's great. I love it. My favorite is my least favorite. Sorry. My favorite one to shit on. Can we say that?
Yes.
So my favorite titles to shit on in the MCU are any that is adapted from a large universe event. Age of Ultron, terrible, hated it, loved the comic books, went into the movie, and just got mad. Civil War made me unimaginable. Like, and I think the worst one was Thanos. Thanos, they did him such a dirty in the MCU, and it makes me so sad. Dude who was like, you know what? I'm courting death. What do you give death? Dead people. So let's kill a whole bunch of people and then get death's attention. And they took that and they're like, we're going to give him the philosophy of a high school gym teacher. Go. And it ruined like a lot of the dramatic beats of that entire arc. And also, like, Civil War was such, and is still such, a huge pivotal role in the Marvel universe. And the thing is Civil War doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a comic book series or event that is driven forward by the plot. Not to say the plot is weak, but a lot of the richness and the true interesting bits in Civil War comes because they'd spent so long building up the relationship between Iron Man and Captain America. And between, like, hate to say it, Iron Fist and Luke Cage and all these other duos and, like, teams that they created to have synergy and, like, friendships that organically came out of a large comic book history. And that's why Civil War was so interesting, because, like, even in my Cable and Deadpool comic, my, like, very, very favorite run, there's Civil War chapters where they're fighting and they have to deal with the aftermath of that. And say how you want, sometimes it was ham-handed in some of the branching off series that the Civil War was involved in, but the character interactions made that series. And quite frankly, the MCU didn't have enough time to build it. Iron Man and Captain America hated each other, so they didn't have the true character development that would sell Civil War. And then they didn't even get they didn't even make both sides sympathetic in Civil War, quite frankly, because when I watched the movie, there was one side that I was obviously you. And that didn't happen in the comics because there was a lot more gray area. There was a lot more messed up shenanigans happening on both sides. And so the movie just fell so flat. And it messed up it messed up a lot. I'm just very mad at that movie. Also, they did Thanos a dirty.
Mm-hmm.
I hate how little characters there are in MCU's Civil War. You look at any comic Civil War cover, and it's just this, a mosaic of iconic characters, battling, and, movie Civil War is 12 people in an airport.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's not a Civil War. It's like a gang fight in an airport.
It's a lover spat. And also there's no stakes in the fight too.
Yeah, they could just both walk away. That was an option.
Oh yeah. The fact that the actual fight, the actual Civil War fight, is not a conflict of characters who disagree with each other, but Steve needs to get to an airplane. That's the big Civil War battle.
Uh-huh. That, oh god. It's
also
weird because oh, go ahead, Lee.
The fact that most of the characters involved in that fight have no reason there. Right? Spider-Man? Do you think Spider-Man would show up to that fight? If I was Spider-Man, I'd be no man, that has the Avengers name on it. I'm gonna keep on being a vigilante who everyone kind of hates in New York, but it won't affect me. Ant-Man? Why did Ant-Man come to that fight? Besides, your bro asked you to. It was just really weak.
Fucking Wanda. Oh, I'm not grounded anymore? Fuck yeah.
I despise Wanda.
Oh, really?
I do not like her characterization in the MCU. Or in the comics either, but
in the comics, I will give her more leeway because she has some interesting motivations and I'm gonna make problems on purpose. Bye. Also, join a terrorist organization.
Literally a Nazi. You are 16, you are a Nazi.
I feel like they definitely should have waited till they had introduced the Fantastic Four and the X-Men to do a Civil War thing at all. Just if nothing else, just to have a bigger roster for a Civil War,
They could try doing it again.
I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
Don't put that out there in the world either. I don't want. Because I will. If they produce another Civil War, I know myself. I will be there. But I don't want to be there. So let's not put that into the universe.
Also, let's not adapt Civil War 2. I did. that whole run was a choice.
It doesn't exist in my brain.
What's Civil
I don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Also, so because I'm a nerd, on my desk, I'm surrounded by the comic books, and so I'm looking at Cable and Deadpool Civil War. And in the first issue, you have Hawkeye, you have Captain America, you have Hercules, you have Daredevil, you have Falcon, you have the Goliath, and that's in one panel, and that's to deal with one superhero. And the movie just doesn't have that depth at all. Because there's some of these guys and they show up on the panel and I'm like, who? And the only reason I know that they exist is because of the handy little caption telling me who they are. And that's what I want out of a Civil War. But we have talked about the MCU. Any last things people want to say before we move on to the DCU? Or any other
I just have one thing.
Adaptations.
Same.
Go for it. Okay, so Marie-Soleil, go for it.
They did Quicksilver so dirty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Shot.
They
They
really-
shot him.
They really left a lot of holes in his story.
You.
I love it.
How dare you.
I'm sorry.
He's the fat. Quicksilver is so fast. Like the X-Men. Quicksilver is how he should
And they
be.
shot him.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the WandaVision TV show, never seen it. The only reason I'd ever watch it is because Darcy Lewis is there and she's not even a comic character. She's the only good thing.
That is fair.
Mhm.
Okay, Gabe.
I just want to say the MCU
What was
has
your
a
last
really
thing?
the MCU has a very disgusting habit of killing off villains in their first appearance. And I'm gonna just say that shit has bothered me up to now. Feige, if you do this shit to Doctor Doom, I will make you regret being born.
I see we've moved on to the threats part of this podcast.
If we're
For legal reasons, they're all a joke.
This is all a joke.
yeah.
Of course.
This next part that I'm gonna say definitely is 100% a joke. Hey, MCU writers, stop fucking pacing your movies with an exciting, interesting first half and a completely generic, boring second half, because I swear to God, I am just going to take the fattest shit on your headquarters. I promise you.
As a joke?
As a protest.
No, you're joking about this, right? Because it's not a bad joke. It's not. I like
Obviously,
Gabe's
yeah, I'm
joke better. Murder is
kidding.
a better
I'm
joke.
kidding. No Way Home was good.
Like-
Fuck, we didn't even talk about the Eternals. No,
We don't
sorry.
need to.
I haven't seen the Eternals. I haven't seen
I've
them.
not seen it.
Bad pacing. Next.
Okay, I just want to say one thing for the MCU. In its defense, the MCU created a weird renaissance in Marvel. Iron Man 1, I will give credit where credit is due. I loved Iron Man, the first one. I loved it. It was a really interesting comic book, and the thing is, like, my only prior experience to Iron Man was through, like, Iron Man Extremis, which I read. I didn't really like the art too much, so I put it down and didn't pick it up again. But I think Iron Man especially, and all of the spin-offs they're doing and everything else that they're creating out of this universe, if nothing else, has created and generated a whole bunch of interest in comics as a medium. And it's kind of like Critical Role for D&D. It brought it forward and into something that more fan who is reaping the benefits of Marvel and DC producing more and more comics, love that for me. That is my only defense. So, if we're done with Marvel, do we want to discuss DC? Because I realize it is almost 11 now. We're taking some time, and I said that we should probably keep it under.
Okay, we just have to now keep this under 2 days.
Valid. So, do we now want to discuss DC? And then the last bullet point we have after MCU versus DCU and other adaptations is live action versus cartoon, which is honestly the bit that I have my biggest horse in the race for live action versus cartoon. But shall we discuss DCU? I take the silence as a yes or no?
Yeah, let's do it.
My biggest gripe with the DCEU is the fact that it hasn't embraced what it has right now, and that is its creative. Like it's like we've long kind of like we've already acknowledged it, but it's openness and creativity to put its most iconic characters into completely different settings and in completely different stories makes DC just such an interesting property to follow. And for the longest time, the DCEU has felt like has obviously been copying Marvel, like thereby completely undercutting its own originality, because like casting choices pretty good, I'd say, for like the most part. It had a decent start in my opinion with Man of Steel, because that's like Zack Snyder's interpretation of the story, and love it or hate it, like I really enjoy it because it's a different adaptation of what Superman is. It's not like the core of what makes Superman, but I was trusting that in future adaptations, like maybe he would get it. Fucking didn't.
Nope.
But even then, just it's like at that point it was all under one man who really, I think, just either didn't quite understand or maybe was shooting a bit too far with what made DC, and that and there is just why everything just feels off about it. Like it's because of things, and I'm not saying, I'm just blaming like Zack Snyder for this. Like there's a lot of fault with DC's, but just when it comes to the DCEU now, after getting stories such as Aquaman, Shazam, Birds of Prey, the Suicide Squad, and soon eventually Flashpoint, like they each feel like, and you know, not even like relating to like a superhero vibe, like Joker, for example, and soon the Batman, like all of those feel interesting. They feel like their own interesting like set stories, and that's what helps keep DC separate. Like Marvel, people know Marvel for its continuity, like the fact that it's been going on for ages now, and it's this one long continuous timeline. DC doesn't have to do that, and the fact that they're kind of embracing that now, especially after like there may be some tie-ins, but like the Suicide Squad and Suicide Squad don't feel like the same movie, and it's great that it doesn't, because you know, obvious shitting on the first Suicide Squad, but just like the Suicide Squad is maybe like the best example of this. It takes a bunch of random characters that only so few people know about, some established characters from the previous ones, and gives them a new burst of life. It makes them just so it's a fun ride, and that's what like the DCEU, like that's what DC should be doing with their movies. It's just letting it be creative. It doesn't all have to tie in, because Marvel's already doing that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna be totally honest.
Gabe.
Yeah. I'm gonna be totally honest. When we started talking about DC, I was like, okay, great. I got to talk about the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, which I've been watching and really, really love both of them. I love everything James Gunn has ever made. I would die for this man. And then you said the Joker, and I was like, oh, I completely forgot that movie existed. Which I know sounds crazy, because it's like that's not even a bad movie by any stretch. I completely forgot about it when in the context of like modern DC. But yeah, like that. I mean, that is a really good example how like they're just like, okay, we're just gonna make a movie. It's not beholden to any. This is exactly what I was saying with the problem with MCU is everything is beholden to like what's the next project, and I feel like with stuff like that, it's like okay, we'll just make this. It doesn't. Who gives a shit? We'll just make it. It doesn't have to lead into anything. I hope they never make a sequel. I hope it doesn't tie into the Batman. I hope. Well, I honestly, I hope. I mean, I know they are making a sequel because the movie made like $1 bajillion. But like, I hope to God I never see Joaquin Phoenix as Joker again, and not in a way that like I didn't like Joaquin Phoenix as Joker, but in a way that like I love movies that just like sort of exist for themselves and don't have to like be a franchise. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Franchise fatigue. Basically.
And like, I felt like, and like, of course, the Suicide Squad did tie into a TV show, which, but like, I felt like the vibe I got with the Suicide Squad was sort of like the polar opposite of what I got from the first Suicide Squad movie. Which by the way, I hate that they called it the Suicide Squad. Why couldn't they have given us? I hate having to refer to it as the Suicide Squad and the first Suicide Squad. Kill me. But what I liked about it was that I didn't like with the first Suicide Squad. I got the impression that a big thing weighing down on this movie was that they were like, okay, we have to make this movie. We have to set up Jared Leto as Joker. We have to set up Harley Quinn. We have to set up all this bullshit that's happening in the MCU, not DCU timeline. Doesn't Batman show up in like an end credit scene and he says some shit? I barely even remember. I think there's like an end credit scene with that. Either way, what I liked about the Suicide Squad was I liked how I got the impression that the Suicide Squad started as a project where it was like, okay, let's make these characters, let's put them in the story, and then the story ends. Maybe they'll show up in something in the future, but they're not beholden to whether or not they could show up in something in the future. So we can just fucking kill them. We can have them go AWOL and potentially never show up again. We can flatten a character under a giant fucking tentacle. Who gives a shit? There are no rules, and I think when it comes to especially directors like James Gunn, who I look at their work and I could tell that they are on military grade cocaine. I feel like letting people like that just go off the hook and do whatever the fuck they want. I feel like that's the best way to do it. And I feel like that's something that works out in the comics a lot is when you take an artist or a writer or dare I say both. And like just let them loose, give them free reign, and I feel like that's something that the MCU has struggled with. Kevin Feige, I feel like I'm not going to rant about MCU anymore. I am so sorry. We're talking about DCU. I feel like DCU is very good at. I'm just talking. Sorry, go. I'm just saying so much. I'm talking so fast. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, it's all good.
Yeah, I feel like they at least the direction that the DCU is going in is very promising, and I hope they do more shit with Shazam, because that was another movie that I really fucking adored. Shazam. That was like I watched that, and that was the first time that I got the same vibe as like the Raimi Spider-Man movies when watching the superhero movies. I fucking love that movie. I can't wait for Shazam too.
Yeah. I think, like, to touch on that, like, just for a little bit, like, I totally agree with what Gabe said. It's DC's movies nowadays feel pretty conclusive. Like, they can, and I think in the case with the Suicide Squad, like, they have the opportunity to expand on certain characters, but not the Suicide Squad as a whole. Like, with Peacemaker's story isn't over, and it's continuing through his own series, and that's awesome, but we're not going to get... Like, hopefully we don't get a follow-up to, like, Suicide Squad or the Suicide Squad, because it just feels very conclusive. Like, Task Force X has done their job. They've done their mission. What else could they do? Right? Like, you can have them each on smaller missions, which both, like, continues the canon of what's going on, but at the same time is still entirely its own separate thing. And that's awesome. Like, I think just establishing like Shazam, like you said, Gabe, in the context of, or in this context, like Shazam is in an interesting place because it's still very much within the DCEU, but it's also its own conclusive story, and that's great. I love to see what Shazam does outside of any potential team up. Like, I want to just have Shazam's own canon. It doesn't have to tie into like some greater, bigger story. I think the same thing too with Birds of Prey. Birds of Prey like was very interesting as its own concept, because it's largely just a it's largely just like a collection of like awesome characters, awesome moments, good storytelling, and like an interesting pace, like an interesting presentation, and it's good. Like that's awesome. Like Joker 2 is like in like in an age of like superhero movies, it's not like a superhero movie. It's a breakdown of a persona. And that's awesome. Like that's where DC celebrates its creativity, and that's what makes DC, like that's what hopefully DC will start embracing.
So, Marie-Soleil.
I'm going to be entirely honest. I haven't watched much of the DCU. It doesn't catch my interest. The characters are too dark and brooding, which is weird for me to say. But like, Superman has no reason to try to save the world. Everybody hates him. It's true, and every time we see him, like in the first like Superman movie, his parents are telling him like, "Don't use your powers; it's not safe." The only reason he's Superman is so that he can save the girl. He's only a Superman for Lois Lane, and he's also kind of an idiot.
A little bit.
Yeah, I haven't watched much, actually, of the DCU. I watched the first Suicide Squad movie, haven't watched the second one. Haven't watched Birds of Prey, but although I keep meaning on watching that. I can barely remember Superman versus Batman, but I did watch it. Haven't watched the Justice League movies.
Oh, God, the Justice League movie.
Oh, God.
I will talk about the Justice League movies.
You may not have seen it, but have you seen Henry Cavill's just CGI'd out mustache?
I've seen that. I watched the Wonder Woman movie, and then I got kind of upset with when I saw images from the Justice League movie when the Amazon showed up there, because they completely different costume change. Like they had armor in the Wonder Woman movie, and then it completely changed to like a lot skimpier outfits.
Oh yeah,
in Justice League.
Yeah.
But I heard that was done because the original costumes were actually pretty uncomfortable to wear. So I'm not upset about that. If it was actresses' comfort that meant they changed the outfits, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of a meh with the DCU.
That is fair.
Yeah.
So I will admit I'm very meh with the DC, like the live action DCU. But I also want to point out one beautiful part of irony that just delighted me in the Superman movies when I first saw it, is someone telling Superman it's not safe. Like, is he any less bulletproof when he's out of his special pajamas and cloak? No. So, like, really, what is not safe for Superman? But that is a complete other thought process. What you guys were talking about with how DCU is transitioning to closed stories, I think is actually very interesting, because I will admit I did not watch I think the Joker peaked with us and shit stir, and then he would just run away from the plot. I think that is what peak Joker is, and I think there's a lot more interesting villains. No, you laugh, but in like the Long Halloween, the Joker would show up for like half a chapter, threaten Harvey Dent because he thinks Harvey Dent is a serial killer, find out that's not the fact, and then just disappear until he comes back later to gas the city. And I think that is peak Joker, because there are more interesting villains. But I think one of my biggest beefs with the DCU as well as Marvel Universe is that they mismatch their universe to their characters almost. Because if you look at the characters in Marvel and then you compare them to the characters in a lot more mythical in origin and a lot more over the top. And then you have Marvel, whose characters are normally more sci-fi based and more like down to earth. So you have Captain America, you have Iron Man. Are you telling me they're going to beat Superman have the same power level as either Wonder Woman or Superman? No way. But they kind of took these characters and shoved them into each other's universe. So DC, when it was first started out, tried to take Superman and make like an unkillable Jesus metaphor, gritty and dark, and in a universe where there's real stakes. And that doesn't necessarily make sense for that character who literally cannot be killed unless he decides to let it happen with kryptonite in some cases. And then you took Iron Man, who's a character that's a lot more down to earth, and then they're just like, okay, let's have like a fun romp through here. And it's almost as if they mismatched their universes to their character levels as I'm watching them. And that's like my biggest beef with them. But you guys are right. I do like how DCU is creating short stories that are self-contained, and also I absolutely love, because I know this annoyed you, Gabe, but I love how when the first Suicide Squad didn't work out, they were like, you know what? Let's have another. I love that for them, because that's exactly how you do comics. There's just one Suicide Squad you don't talk about, and that's okay.
Yeah.
What's Suicide Squad? What Ayer cut? What?
Yeah, I mean, like, and that happens with comics all the time. I mean, like, I've talked all the time about how much I love Moon Knight and adore Moon Knight, and then there's also the Bendis run.
We don't talk about the Bendis run. It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. The Bendis run doesn't exist. But yeah, it's like that's and then like but to facilitate my point though, it does exist.
It does.
It does exist. But then like 2 years after that, the fucking Ellis run came out, and the Ellis run is like that has basically shaped what like modern Moon Knight is. It's such a fucking good take on the character. It's and which like it's basically the same thing has happened. They had that version and then the good version. That's great.
Yeah, it's like every once in a while they do a practice run to see what's up, and then they're like, never mind. But no. So, last point. What do you guys think about live action remakes or animated remakes? Because personally, I have a lot of opinions on this. I'm not sure if you guys... Marie-Soleil, what are your thoughts?
I prefer the animated remakes. They are less cowards than the live actions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the animated Batman that we found out that John Constantine was in a relationship with King Shark.
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Love that.
You wouldn't see that happening in the live action. They're too big of cowards. We could have had the relationship with Killer Croc and the Enchantress, but no, cowards.
They're too scared to even put Constantine into those movies.
Cowards.
Which is just
Cowards.
That's just painful all on its own, all in a whole different kind of way.
Yeah. Okay. Gabe, animated versus live action, go.
Animated, no question. I will say I can't think of a great many Marvel cartoons that I loved, except for Spectacular Spider-Man, which Spectacular Spider-Man. But like DC cartoons. I mean, I already talked at length about at Teen Titans and Young Justice, and like that shit busted.
Yep.
DC cartoons, that shit busted. Like it's almost it's kind of crazy how good some of that shit can be. Like yeah, I no question. Animated, absolutely no question. I mean, I can't. I mean, like, I'm just thinking of shit like Batman and Beyond, Under the Red Hood. Batman is such a better character in animation than he's. Recently I divulged that I really dislike the Dark Knight trilogy, and like Batman in any cartoon is like. That's what I want Batman to be. I need him to be like I just can't stand the gratification of Batman, and I need some cartoon Batman.
I'm definitely with you as a longtime Batman fan. He's always so much better in the animated titles. And I
Mhm.
think part of that is if you watch Batman or you read Batman comics, so much about his character is his environment and how he's illustrated.
Yeah, like
And
Gotham is a sorry.
do that. Sorry, you can't do that in a live action. You can't because there's some panels when Batman's literally just a triangle with ears.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
it's delightful.
Okay.
And there's so many
Can't
members
make
who
the triangle with ears out of a real person.
no.
Hmm.
And there's so many characters who like I deeply adore from Batman's Rogues Gallery who I will probably never see in a good live action movie because they insist on doing gritty. Like I will never see good Mr. Freeze in a movie as so long as Batman live action insists on being like dark and gritty and serious. And Mr. Freeze he he's Mr. Freeze. Or like Poison Ivy, like they'll never do Poison Ivy. They like I can't imagine with all like the serious tones of it and like they're playing fucking Alice in Chains and like they've got like the Zodiac. I cannot imagine that the Batman is going to have Mr. Freeze in any sequel or like Poison Ivy in any sequel or anything like any character like that is like just completely off the table once it's dark and gritty. But in a cartoon, you can totally do that shit. Nothing's off the table. It's a fucking cartoon.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Dean, animated versus live action, go.
3 for 3 animated, because Spider-Verse already convinced me that, like, if, like, a definite possibility, if not a for sure medium that superhero movies should consider taking more seriously is animation. Spider-Verse was not even a question. It is fantastic. And I think, like, with the future of, like, animation, like, with all respect to animation, it takes a hell of a long time to do that. And it's easier to just pump out a live action movie. But when it's good, it's fucking great. Like Spider-Verse is an exception. I'm not super familiar with a lot of like other properties though. Like obviously there's Teen Titans and Young Justice, which were fantastic, but at the same time, like stepping into that kind of anime, like stepping into that kind of like into animation, not just like, I think animation is one thing, but like anything but live action is a good way of approaching it. Like video games too, not Marvel's Avengers or not Squeenix Avengers, but like with like Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales
Arkham
game.
Knight.
Yeah, the Arkham series. Like there is really good potential for like comics to be adapted in more interesting ways nowadays. Like live action, I think live action ended when Endgame was over. Because at that point everyone had been following the MCU since Iron Man 1, and the ending to Endgame felt so conclusive that it's still taking Marvel loads to try to capture that excitement back. People are having franchise fatigue. No one wants to keep investing in multiple sequels like that, especially like whole series of movies that connect into each other, like with Jurassic Park, The Matrix, like Indiana Jones. They're still their own movies, and they're still their own movies and keep to their own story and are conclusive. But Captain America's trilogy, Iron Man's trilogy, each play into each other. The like Wonder Woman plays into Batman v Superman. Like the continuity of everything was fine when it was still fresh, but now that the freshness is starting to rot, we need to fucking throw it out.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, animated, because that's
Nice.
fresh, that's new.
So we are 4 out of 4 for animated versus live action. And I almost wish, because like Gabe is right. I cannot think of a single animated Marvel title right now that blew my socks off.
I can only think of a I can only think of a I can only think of a couple. And they're kind of cheating because it's like of course that well this sucks, but the rare breed of the the X-Men anime.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Because
that is fair.
That shit goes crazy. But other than that, yeah, Marvel cartoons don't exactly blow me away.
They don't. But like DC cartoons are always delightful. So like the Flashpoint cartoon, wonderful. Gotham by Gaslight, fucking great. Under the Red Hood, amazing. Also, these are going to be a lot of Batman titles because I really like Batman. And they recently redid The Long Halloween, which was like, I watched it literally before this podcast, and it was amazing. And I think part of this success comes from the fact that DC, like I said, will just take an existing comic book run and then throw all the panels together and make a movie. Which I honestly think if you're going to remake a comic book, why would you ever try and live action that shenanigans? There's no point. Like, you're not going to get
everything to live action now.
Pardon?
They're turning everything to live action. Their Snow White is going to be a live action.
Oh my god!
Which is awful. I hate this.
Oh my god!
I from like good animated movies to like 3D movies, and then they're like, well, if we're doing 3D movies, we might as well just do live action movies again.
Hey, Lilo and Stitch live action when?
No. That is all I have to say to that.
I can't wait to see the sandwich stacker in real life.
Oh god. Could you imagine Stitch, like the CGI Stitch that they would give us?
It would look like the original CGI Sonic.
I was gonna say that, yeah, it would look like that. Oh god. Disney just needs to stick with animation. Encanto was beautiful up until the ending. Last couple minutes. But yeah, fantastic.
Back to comics.
I was about to say, I'm completely okay with Disney just bleeding itself dry trying to make live action, but DC should stick with its comic book formula. Because the thing is, like, even with the new stuff that appear in their animated series, like Superman the animated series and Batman the animated series, I think were huge feathers in their caps. And it's because DC lets these creators create new characters. And they let them actually introduce new story points that later on got absorbed by the entire universe. And I just haven't seen any of that out of Marvel. And I will ride or die. I have never seen a DC animation that I didn't at least enjoy. Mm-hmm. And like, I tried watching the new reboot of Avengers for like the animated one. Didn't really enjoy it. Didn't like it. I do have to say, the Spectacular Spider-Man and how they did like cameos of Moon Knight and cameos of like Deadpool. Yes. I thought they did those side characters very well. But then they just didn't touch on it and like continue doing stuff, and that's why I lost interest. But yeah.
If we're talking on like once.
No. Animated above live action.
Yeah. If we're talking about once in animation, hey Marvel, could you give me, I don't know if anyone else would agree, but could you give me an animated Doctor Strange story? Please?
Oh, yes.
Just
because like okay, you guys go first because I'm on a hella delay.
Well, I'm just saying, like, Doctor Strange, from what I know him in the comics, very entertaining character. The Doctor Strange in in the MCU is fine. I think I don't have a reference because I don't know Doctor Strange from the comics, but like knowing what he could be from like teasing What If, or from the teases in What If, God, like just if they really commit to it, they could have an incredibly visually stunning Doctor Strange animation.
So I'm totally there with you because I've followed a couple of Doctor Strange runs, and I find Doctor Strange is kind of like the Hulk, where his comics are very hit and miss. And I think a large part of that is, once again, the art. Because, like, there's this beautiful run. I don't even remember the year. I don't even remember who the artist was. But there was, like, almost an extraplanar dimension in his fridge that was slowly crawling out and taking over the house. And that was a beautiful comic. And it's not something I think you could ever get the styling or cinematography for without animation. And so much of the enjoyment of Doctor Strange for me comes with the fact that it is almost surreal and completely universe bending, because that's what he deals with, and you can't do that with CGI circles and doing like random big body movements to simulate magic like they did in the live action.
I'll give maybe the live action one some credit. The Dormammu sequence specifically, very creative. I like that.
I would love to see
awesome.
Mr. Misery show up in a future Doctor Strange MCU project, because that's one of my favorite Doctor Strange characters.
Yeah.
I don't think they will, but like I really wish they would. I think Mr. Misery is a bit too dark for them to delve into that.
I also think that the live action takes suffer a lot from they choose popular characters for the live action remakes, where instead they could choose like a less popular character and really tell a story with it. Instead, they take a character that they put it on a movie poster and all the comic book fans are going to go rabid for. Right? Like Thanos. Thanos suffered from this syndrome a lot. Because when I've heard that Thanos was going to be in a movie, I was like, yes! I will see this plot on the big screen! And then I just... But, do we have any closing comments?
I have 2.
Excellent.
First,
please share.
If anybody is listening to this and decides they want to try to read comics, point of note, you should look up the runs before you get involved in comics, because some of them can be very out there. Like I mentioned, DC Bombshells. I love these comics, but like I said, takes place in World War II. You deal with racism, anti-Semitism, but also this is a comic, so there are undead, not quite zombie Nazi soldiers, because the Nazis have necromancy on their side. Or there's the Marvel's Ultimates run, where trigger warning for cannibalism. The Blob eats the Wasp. Like, they go all out on these things. And my second point is, like, it's kind of really, really random, but if, like, and it goes to how they go all out. Back when they were writing comics, they did things really weird. Like, Jason Todd, everyone knows Jason Todd. He died because of a poll. They put 2 phone numbers in the back of a comic. Call one if you want him to live. Call the other if you want him to die.
Yeah.
And then apparently there's a claim that a lawyer, programmed his computer to call the die number, the number to kill him, every couple of minutes.
Oh no.
And that's why Jason Todd died. That's how insane some of these decisions comic books have made. So just look up the comic book run before you start reading it, just so you know what you're getting into.
If you are looking to start reading comic books, the best advice I can give you is look up a character that you are familiar with or really like. Superman is a very easy character to start reading comic books with. Deadpool, if you start on the 2019 run, is a very easy comic book character to get into comics with. But choose a character you like, and then Google best comic series to read for this character, and then choose one of those to read. Because that'll be the best way to get you in. But here's the thing, you can't quit after the issue, because after the first issue, you probably won't understand fully what's happening. You just kind of have to power through it a little bit. And that's probably the best way that I would suggest to get into comics. Gabe, I see your little green light going off a little bit. Is it my delay or?
Oh no, I think it's my mouse. My mouse was moving.
Oh, okay.
I don't really have advice for people getting into comics. Just like, I would say, like, if anything that we have talked about in this episode sounds neat, be it whatever we talked about. I don't know. That was years ago. That's gone. No.
It no longer exists.
If something in this episode caught your attention, please do check it out. Comics are a great medium. I think for new comic readers, there is like a bit of a weirdness because I think people have this attitude that's like, oh, comic books, more like stupid bullshit. So like, have an open mind. You know, if you check out if something sounds interesting, just check it out. Don't be afraid to, read something that's maybe it is a little stupid. Who cares?
And don't let the gatekeepers scare you away.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
Well, no, just I'll elaborate on that now. Actually, for my thing, embrace creativity. Like, there are plenty of ways for comics to be incredible stories, because not only do you have a very strong story potentially, or maybe a weak one, but just you have the visual element to keep your eyes attentive. It's a nice crossroads between reading a book and watching a short film or watching a movie. It's so like visually engaging, whether you are whether you are like keeping up with your favorite superheroes, or like reading a whole news story that that's unrelating to superheroes. If it's like, comics is not tied to superheroes anymore. It's still largely associated with it, yeah, but it's not just defined by a single thing anymore. And the thing that I was going to say about gatekeeping is just when I say embrace creativity, it literally just means like be open to new things. Like, be open to different interpretations. Be open to new ways of like sharing stories. Be open to different ways of different ways of like characters, because like they may be larger than life personas, yeah, but ultimately superheroes are still people, and people like such as generations and like, or much like generations and interests change. So stop fucking gatekeeping and let people enjoy things.
Valid. No, I don't have any other closing remarks other than Dean is right. Comics are a lot more than superheroes, and I think more people should branch out from the superhero genre, even though I love it. But there's a lot more interesting things in comics happening. But with that, I do believe we are done for the evening. So thank you everyone for listening. We are at the InkGuild on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Our main home is on YouTube and Spotify, but you can also connect with us individually through our own social media. Except for me, because I am a shadow in the night and you will never get my true identity. Check out our Wix if you want to learn more about us, and keep an eye out for more podcasts and other creative projects. I also believe Marie-Soleil is running a Tumblr for us if you
Yes.
wish to go see the sheer unbridled chaos. Well then, thank you very much for listening, everyone, and I hope you have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Night.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Or good morning.